Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 5 of Shot of Nostalgia, Smoky Mountain Wrestling 1994. My God, the journey is just flying by here down at Turnbuckle Tavern. But as always, I'm good old Mike Belcaster, and joining me are my two co-hosts with the most.
Live from No Cell Studios at the ACEFIELD Tavern, ACEFIELD Retro. And man, before we get into it, let's introduce the Kentucky Waterfall himself. What's up, dude?
What's going on, fellas? Man, Smoky Mountain, episode 5. Shot of Nostalgia, September and October. How do we get here so fast, guys?
It feels like we aren't abiding by the speed limits in the DeLorean. We're just speeding through. And 7 episodes we knew would be abbreviated, but we didn't know how fast it would actually go. And we are, as you said, approaching the end of this year. Things are starting to come to a full tilt as far as what we expected. We finally got the gangsters here. Of course, we're seeing Chris Jericho and Lance Storm be who they are. Macho Man came and went. Jake Roberts came, no showed, and he went away. And also, we have some new debuts this week, some faces that are familiar, guys like D'Lo Brown under a new name that we aren't familiar with, as familiar with, AC Connor. And also, Cactus Jack is here, Belcaster. What the hell?
It's who'd have thought, man? It's just, I mean, Mick Foley's been a tie-in for every season we've done for
Very good point,
man. I love it. I'm here for it. Give me all the Cactus Jack content in the world. So good.
So we're going to be reviewing 2 months of Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and you guys gotten used to it for the past 4 episodes. The 5th episode will be the same September and October. We're going to go through all the TV tapings, the newsletters, and all the live events to keep you up to date on all the happenings in 1994. Just so you know, the next 2 episodes, episode 6 and 7, will be a little bit different. Only 1 month review. November 1994 will be fully dedicated to episode 6, and our finale will be December, just the month of December. And who knows where it will take us. It might not be as long, but we wanted to do 7 episodes. We promised you 7. We're going to break it down in those pieces. The one premiere event we're covering during this is the Big Apple Brawl.
Woo!
This is also September 30th, 1994. Only one big event in September, October. I think they kind of, with Night of the Legends, the episode before, they kind of blew their load a little bit, Colton. We only have that one big event here. And I know it's a lot on the table here, but most of the stuff happening about Smoky Mountain Wrestling seems to be behind the curtain.
Yeah, most definitely, man. September and October, I think we finally start seeing some of the side effects from all the stress that Jim Cornette's been under with having Jake the Snake no show, and maybe some not so forgiving write-ups in the Torch in the servers. The stress and the cracks are finally starting to show from Cornette a little bit here.
So why waste any time? Let's hop right into the happy hour. Let's get our lips wet here and start getting our buzz here in the happy hour. Find out what's going on in September of 1994.
Happy hour.
Uncle Dave Meltzer in 1994 leading us through here, and Dusty Rhodes' war cry lets us know it's time to go through the newsletters. September 5th, 1994, we have the debut of Boo Bradley, who's known as a Buddha Singh from New Jersey. He aired on TV this weekend with Tammy Fitch holding him by a leash. Yeah, that's right, like an animal. And Chris Candido had said he used to be his childhood friend, and they were looking for a new partner, just like Brian Lee. Big, strong, and dumb. He said Bradley used to beat up the kids who were giving Candido trouble because everyone was jealous of his natural blonde hair, and all he had to do was give him half a peanut butter sandwich in return. Meltzer said the segment came off funny. Colton, we know this man as Balls Mahoney. What are your thoughts on this?
Man, it's I wouldn't have known it was Balls Mahoney if somebody hadn't told me before I saw him, because he's got a much different look here. We're used to seeing Balls, not necessarily the most clean cut guy. A lot of hair on a lot of long hair and a goatee, but dude, he's got quite the haircut here. It's kind of a weird shave, and I don't think I ever thought I'd see him at least on all fours with a leash around his neck. So yeah, this is it's cool to see him though, man. It's cool to get, I had no idea that he was going to pop up here whatsoever. So nice surprise, but a very interesting presentation.
So going to the September 12th, 1994, it wasn't long before Boo Bradley made his impact known. He won the TV title from Lance Storm at the 9-5 tapings in Cumberland, Kentucky. Storm had Bradley, who's doing a dog gimmick, and Meltzer said, wearing a leash, walking around on all four legs, barking. Pinned when Chris Candido jumped on the apron. Storm knocked Candido off the apron, allowed Bradley to get his chain leash and knock out Storm with it. So yeah, Belcaster, they're doing this very much on the nose here. He's playing literally a dog gimmick. We know with Smoky Mountain Wrestling, they're willing to take risks. They're doing things that are out of the ordinary. We saw literally a undead mummy. We saw Kendo the Samurai. We see all these other stuff going on here. Do you think this fits, or is this one of those things that was a miss for Smoky Mountain?
Listen, it worked for Rick Steiner. I mean, it didn't work as well for good old Balls Mahoney, but it's cool to see a unique character all over the place. I mean, if you guys Google a picture of what Balls Mahoney looks like here, like we were talking before, he's got a ponytail in the front of his head. He's got some weird shit shaved in the back of his head. It's a different look, but yeah, man, cool to see kind of the debut of Balls Mahoney. I've always been a big fan of Balls Mahoney. I can think we could all agree he was a fun, entertaining worker. So cool to see him get his legs under.
So we had Brian Logan getting involved after, and he hit the ring. Chris Candido hit the pile driver on him, which is banned, as we know. It's pretty. We talked about this extensively in past episodes. The pile driver is a move that is not allowed to be used, and they take it very seriously to the point where Jim Cornette and Bob Armstrong, everyone involved in management, suspended Chris Candido for 30 days. This was a way to get him out, to let him do his All Japan tour, which this is the reason why Chris Candido was written off TV. They recorded some interviews after the suspension, and this was clever. And the thing, Colton, about this band pile driver is when it is hit, it really has some emphasis on it. And it really felt like something special, even though, like, as we watch on every wrestling show nowadays, especially AEW, you see all these crazy moves get done. And we watched that crazy ladder match on Saturday in Collision between Andrade and Buddy Matthews, the sunset flip bomb onto a ladder and all that stuff. There's something to be said about the simplicity of the pile driver. When it is banned, there's something about, like, when it just hits different.
Yeah, it gives it a little bit more notoriety, and it kind of gives it this level of mystique. As soon as you see it, you almost like, did that really just happen? Man, is he going to get fined? Is he going to get suspended? And, we were talking too, about AEW just recently releasing a list of so far or pre-approved or banned moves, whatever you have. And then just like the past Saturday on Collision, we saw a buckle bomb. And that was the first thing that went through my head. I was like, oh man, it automatically makes that move more special when you draw attention to it and ban it, or, give it some sort of extra notoriety, which is just great Corny trick of the wrestling business.
It's something similar to when a guy, we talk about this all the time, they're wearing a bandage of some sort. They comes off during the match. It feels so vulnerable. And, we see that all the time. Like Cody Rhodes wearing the arm brace. If that comes off and someone stamps on his hand, it feels different, because we can all empathize when something is a little bit off and then someone takes advantage of it. So very, very interesting stuff here. But we also have another debut of a familiar face, I said in the intro. We had AC Connor, a.k.a. D'Lo Brown, making his debut in a dark match and was said to have looked good. Belcaster, we talked about him during ECW 1995. He was part of the ring crew. He made some cup of coffee positions in ECW 1995, but this is really where he gets his name kind of out there in the beginning.
Yeah.
Train, getting some legs under him. He eventually joins the Gangsters as well, but this is his first cup of coffee, and D'Lo Brown popping in.
Yeah, no, I mean, our MVP of 1998, man. I mean, who did not enjoy watching D'Lo Brown do his thing? But it's cool, like, just same thing with Balls Mahoney. It's super cool to see these guys kind of getting their start, getting their their wings out there. You're flying a little bit, and yeah, man, it's a trip to always go back and witness these things in person. Like, it's wild.
So we also had the return to Johnson City, and this is notable because it's the first time that they're going back since what they're referring to as a haircut fiasco on 9/2. They drew about 500 fans, which is no more or less than expected. And Meltzer continues, they gave the fans a major rock and roll versus gangsters brawl all over the building, pull apart to the dressing room, then open the curtain so fans could see them brawling, then out the back door and into the parking lot. At one point, New Jack was thrown over onto a Corvette, and the car alarm went off in the middle of the angle, which was not planned. And yeah, so again, Colton, big news here. This is the first time they're attempting to do Johnson City. No worse for wear. The fans showed up again. I'm sure Jim Cornette can let out a big exhale because things are okay over there in Johnsonville.
Or Johnson City, yeah.
Johnson City, my bad.
They did a good job bringing it too. Everybody's wildly upset about not seeing Ricky Morton or Tammy get her head shaved, and then you come back and you have this brawl that goes literally all over the building and onto, I'm assuming, an attendee's Corvette or something. I don't know. I hope nobody got hot about any damage to the vehicle, as happens later this month, as we'll get into here shortly. But yeah, I mean, it's good. I'm glad Johnson City's been a good town for him in the past. I mean, that's pretty good crowd. We say at like 450. So Johnson City, for a town that size, that's a good turnout, and good to see that they're not super sore. Just a little over, not even a full month later, coming back here to make up for not delivering on the stipulations, which is something they've done a lot of this year.
Every time I read Johnson City, I have the Darius Rucker song stuck in my head because it's like it's so say from Wagon Wheel. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the song.
It's an old Crow. It's an Old Crow Medicine Show song that Darius Rucker covered.
Oh, okay, there you go. Yeah. There you go. We got some real facts being tossed on here by Colton.
So got to defend the music from my part of the country, man.
I love it. Thank you so much, and shout out to Hootie the Blowfish, I guess.
No, that's that Old Crow Medicine Show song, man. Yeah, Wagon Wheel is often joked as the free bird of this generation because it is just played to death. But still, it's a good song.
Going to the September 19th, 1994, and you mentioned that hopefully no one would get mad about that Corvette being destroyed with New Jack being tossed onto it. We did have an issue with Jim Cornette and Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and a promoter and booker was arrested for cited vandalism and destruction of personal property on 9/12, stemming from an incident the previous night when he smashed all the windows in the front and back windshield of a former employee, Casey O'Connor's car, with a baseball bat. We'll get into the details. And they were both pretty consistent stories, Colton. Give your recollection. I know you and I were both talking off air about these shoot interviews that Casey O'Connor recently has done. Cornette has covered this in long form on his podcast. But from your recollection, we'll get into like what this is classified as and all the stuff that went into it. What exactly went down between the two of them?
So it seems like there's been some disagreements with Cornette and Casey O'Connor over just Casey O'Connor's general work ethic and causing the company some problems. And when I was doing some reading from the newsletters, it even harkened back to the conflict between them first started as Cornette had left a tennis racket underneath the ring at one of the shows, I think in either West Virginia or Virginia. And then O'Connor had been like, oh, well, don't worry about it. I have another one of yours in the car. And he's like, why do you have another one of those in the car? He's like, oh, I was supposed to send it off to be like 3 months ago, I was supposed to put it in the mail to be a giveaway in a contest for Pro Wrestling Insider, I think. So, of course, he's hot about that. At some point, they're deciding to part ways, and Cornette realizes that O'Connor still has a video camera worth about $300 that he's loaned to him. But basically, in an angle, Lance Storm gets his head shoved into Casey O'Connor's car, and there's some damage sustained. He's got a pretty good sized noggin on Lance Storm.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, long story short, basically, Cornette wants his video camera back. Calls O'Connor, and Connor's like, well, yep, I have it. Come over here to my house and get it. And I can't remember who it was. I have to go back in the notes, but somebody, I think it was another person who worked for the promotion, was like, hey man, Corny's hot and he's coming to your house. Like, you might not want to be here for this, or like get your vehicle out of there. And by the time that he had somebody moving his vehicle, Cornette had already pulled up and blocked the driveway. And with the help of a baseball bat, destroyed every window on the Nissan of Casey O'Connor, causing depending on which report you hear it from, somewhere between $800 and $1,200 worth of damage, which will come into play later because on the $800 end, you're in misdemeanor territory, but on the $1,200 end, you're in low-level felony territory.
So the person that called him was Anthony Michaels, a prelim wrestler, as they're calling him here. He was on the ring crew and also Casey O'Connor's roommate. So O'Connor was made aware of this prior to, but as you said before, Anthony Michaels didn't get to him soon enough, and all of a sudden you had a raging hot Jim Cornette in your driveway, bashing up your car and leaving no recollection of what was by Casey O'Connor's account, this is years after. This was a car that he put a lot of money into. This is something that he was very invested in. And not to mention too, he became disenchanted with pro wrestling at large. He just didn't love it anymore. So put all those things together. I think they described it as a bad breakup where he probably should have left altogether way too soon. And by the time he decided to leave, it became very obvious that they were not going to coexist. But Cornette was charged with 2 misdemeanors by the Hamlin County Sheriff's Office, although a determination was to be made this week whether the vandalism charge would be elevated to a Class C felony based on the financial amount of the damage. So you referenced before, Cornette was sent to jail, and he was released after posting $5,000 bond, and an arraignment was scheduled for 9/14. So the interesting part, especially in pro wrestling, both sides gave a very similar story. And also in the interview I'm referencing with O'Connor, he said that Dave Meltzer was almost dead on with the story himself, Belcaster. So all the negative publicity that came from this, we'll talk about it more because it's in other newsletters throughout September and October. Yeah. Your thoughts on this? Like, what is this? Just like, is this the craziest thing you ever read, or is this pro wrestling business at large?
Pro wrestling business at large. Corny being corny. Listen, you get hot, and when you get hot, you're gonna go after somebody, man. It's like, it doesn't matter if Lance Storm leaves a Canadian, flag-sized dent in your car. Cornette's gonna show up and be like, "Man, fuck that dent, fuck your car," and just smash all your windows. And I wouldn't want it any other way. I just feel bad for how many missed cheeseburgers that is on the back pay for Corny, man, because that's a lot of $5,000 bail. You got to pay the car, like you're looking at like eight grand. That's fucking insane, man.
So going to the September 26, 1996 newsletter, we continue to talk about much of the news revolving around the aftermath of Jim Cornette. Everyone was talking about it on the front page story in the local Morristown Citizen Tribune. They had a humorous story in the Miami Herald, which was carried nationally by Knight Ridder in a phone message on Cornette's answer machine, which made both stories. Cornette's home phone answered, "Hi, this is Richard Kimball," which is the character from the movie The Fugitive. And he says, "I swear it was a one-armed man with that baseball bat. If you got the message about Smoky Mountain Wrestling, leave it. If you got a message about my new paint body and auto glass shop, leave that too." So Jim Cornette definitely kept his sense of humor, and he took it in stride. And this is the type of stuff what legends are made of. I understand that you don't want to be in litigation trouble. You don't want to face any sort of charges, but this is sort of what got Cornette on the radar of a lot of people. If you were a wrestling fan, you knew him, but this became more than that. He became kind of a cult hero, and we still see that cult. And nowadays people gravitate to him because he believes in what he does and he follows through on what he says.
Yeah, a cult of Cornette's a very real thing. Not only he owns his actions, whether he regrets them or not afterwards, which I think just speaks a lot to his character and why a lot of people love him.
So we also had Cornette also appeared to be the final straw in Ole Anderson's position with WCW. So Ole was working at the training school in Lovejoy, Georgia, and apparently was expected to be fired since WCW needs to cut costs because of all the blood being drawn. Ole's son, Brian Anderson, was recently let go by WCW. Cornette was going to bring Brian in doing an Ole Anderson gimmick, and Ole did several interviews for Cornette promoting his son's arrival in Smoky Mountain Wrestling while working at the school. Eric Bischoff, who hadn't been to the school in 4 months, not so coincidentally drove up while the interview was in progress and privately called Ole over and told him it wasn't his best interest to be talking to Cornette, and then fired him the next day. Your thoughts on that, Belcaster? That's pretty wild here, and it seems like want to talk about someone being toxic or radiating heat in literal sense. You're near Cornette, bad things are happening to you because no one wanted to be associated. And Eric Bischoff had his fair share of issues as well, though.
No, absolutely. Very, very Eric Bischoff to say, "Hey, that's not such a smart idea." And then the next day, you get the phone call saying, "Hey, man, you're fucking gone." But it would have been a cool little angle, I think. It's just, the timing is a motherfucker, and that's Bischoff pulling up right when he's doing the interview, filming for the thing. It sucks, man. But yeah, very, very Eric Bischoff to just play that game of, "Hey, man, go fuck yourself. You're fired."
Moving to the October 3rd, 1994 newsletter, we have the arrival of Jim Ross. He's going to officially replace Bob Caudle as the lead announcer at the October 3rd television tapings. And Meltzer says, with Ross heading things up, Smoky Mountain Wrestling will start its own 900 number. Ross and Les Thatcher will become a regular announcing duo. Ross has been in negotiations with, this was surprising to me, UFC after doing their December pay-per-view show. So Jim Ross on the in-between, we know where he eventually lines up, and he, thankfully for us, becomes the voice of WWF in the most pivotal years. Thinking about him doing UFC and a startup, Colton, and also him here in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, fits the aesthetic of him, but the thing I pulled out of this was the Ultimate Fighting stuff. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, I saw that too, and I was like, man, I had no idea that at this point that was even in the works this early. So yeah, that's not surprised they had their eyes on good old JR because he's an incredible talent. Happy to see him show up here in Smoky Mountain, man. I mean, this is this has been these September, October's 2 months for some big faces, like we said, Cactus Jack, D'Lo Brown, and now we're getting to see good old JR come on the scene. And one thing I thought that was interesting, because I've been a big fan of Bob Caudle's work this entire time, I couldn't find much in my research about Bob Caudle's departure. There wasn't really any reason. It was just all pretty quiet, and actually when I went to Bob Caudle's Wikipedia page, it didn't mention this at all. It said he was there until 95 when they dissolved. So I'm wondering maybe he's just taking a break on air and is doing some more behind the scene works with Cornette, especially considering that he's lost a couple of people because he's been smashing their cars with baseball bats. So yeah, that could fit the story, because I think when we were talking about the whole situation with O'Connor was one of 2 employees besides Cornette that were doing anything for the company and also not performing. So, or I guess the one of 2 that were not on air whatsoever. So by losing O'Connor, you lost 50% of your fully dedicated backstage workforce.
And the thing with Jim Ross too is I think when he became available, you have to take the advantage of it. And maybe Bob Caudle, as you mentioned, remain behind the scenes, and the opportunity to have Jim Ross, at this point, a well-established name in pro wrestling as far as announcers go. He brings a certain cadence to your product, and something feels official when Jim Ross is doing it. So if the price was right and he was available and willing to do the dates, I feel like it was one of those things that Cornette couldn't pass up, because that's the voice of pro wrestling, Jim Ross, even in 94.
Yeah.
And they'd already seen him on the Night of Legends show. It was obviously a good fit. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense they bring him in here as soon as he opens up.
So we have Jim Cornette's hearing on the vandalism charge was scheduled on 9/27, but since he was scheduled in New York for WWF tapings, there's expected to be a continuance on the charge. And at this point, Casey O'Connor hasn't dropped the charges against Cornette, and add Mark Madden to the list of those Cornette went wild on in phone calls. So Mark Madden is from the New York Post. People are talking to Cornette about this, and we reference this very cliche term, but any kind of press is good press. But Colton, do you think this is bad for Cornette's image, or do you think it's something that was good for him at the end of things?
I mean, I think at the end of things, man, I don't think it really, especially considering that they were able to work it out. I mean, it took a while. I think it kind of, if anything, helped his notoriety a little bit, just being somebody that was not someone to cross and not somebody to fuck with, which is a good, if you can establish that about yourself in an industry in a business where people historically fuck with people, it's probably not a bad thing to add that to your resume.
Going to the October 10th, 1994 newsletter by Meltzer, update on the Jim Cornette Casey O'Connor situation is at the 9/27 hearing, the legal charge of vandalism against Cornette for allegedly bashing O'Connor's car windows with an estimated damage of $1,200 being a felony were continued until February, when the case would go before a grand jury. Cornette wasn't present since he was in Poughkeepsie for the WWF tapings. There's a lot of pressure on O'Connor to drop the charges, and Cornette wants to settle the matter out of court, which we will see later this month. They do settle out of court, but that's got to be intimidating. I understand Casey O'Connor is feeling a certain type of way, Belcaster. He's very persistent on making sure he gets what's right. But holding Jim Cornette's feet to the fire, at some point, though, you're going to be blacklisted in the pro wrestling business. And maybe Casey O'Connor didn't care. And then that's sort of the leverage that everyone in this situation has, because if you are doing this to a promoter, you can pretty much kiss any sort of working in wrestling goodbye. But ultimately, he just wants what's going to him. He wants his money that he's owed and the car damages.
Yeah, no, it's insane, man. Especially, I mean, you're talking Cornette's working for WWF. He's all over the place. So you holding him hostage like that, it's gotta be detrimental to your pro wrestling career. But it seems like O'Connor doesn't want to really give a shit about it. And he just wants his car money and to be done with it. Crazy though, absolutely crazy.
So we had an angle showing Ricky Morton going late to the building. He was not at the last tapings, all beat up, claiming he was helping someone on the side of the road, and that all of a sudden he was hit by a club and several people beat him up. He said he knew it wasn't the gangsters, but it looked like it was their security force and vowed revenge. The gangsters did an interview and said the police came to their home, but they were home in bed when the incident occurred. So this is a famous promo from the gangsters. I'm sure you guys have seen this promo before. It's one of the best that the gangsters have done in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. But the other thing I like about this, Colton, is that they took a situation where, Ricky Morton no-showed an event for whatever reason, whether it be travel, he was sick, whatever, and they turned it into storyline progression. They took what was bad and they fed the consistency and they made it make sense. And that's what you got to do. Sometimes you got to make chicken salad out of chicken shit.
Yeah, 100%, man, which is something that Smoky Mountain Wrestling has shown time and time again. They're pretty good at doing. But yeah, what I had read is that Ricky's car actually broke down on the top of the fucking mountain, and there was just no way that he was going to be able to make this show. So yeah, man, they did a great job. This promotion, or the only real flub in this situation was, during the promo from the gangsters and from New Jack, as they said, the cops came to talk to them and they were at home asleep. And well, no, actually, brother, you were not home and asleep. You were in the ring. You made the show. You made the town. but it was a great promo. New Jack accuses Ricky Morton of being that he got drunk in a nightclub in Memphis and fell and hit his head, and that they haven't. That's he's turning around trying to put the blame on them, which is just incredible shit, man. I know he came up with that right on the spot and had no trouble doing it.
Part of the appeal of Jim Ross is these sit-down interviews, and something he's done really well all across his career. He still does it well. We've seen the sit-downs with Wardlow, do that character piece they did about the top knot on his man bun being cut off and how much it meant to him. Jim Ross brings a certain prestige to those sit-down interviews, and they started this here in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. They're calling it Confrontation with Jim Ross, and where two people feuding would do an interview, but if there was any physical problems, the one initiated would be fined and suspended. Bob Armstrong and Cornette were out with them building up the Bob versus Mystery Man, which was later revealed as Abdullah. Anderson debuted using the shoulder breaker, standing armbar position as his finisher. But this sit down with Jim Ross is really awesome to see, because this is the type of stuff that helps character development. They take away the suspension and fines. They love that stuff. And I personally think it fits Smoky Mountain's setting. I really do. But Belcaster, your thoughts on this with Jim Ross? Like, is this maximizing his value in your mind, or could they have done something different with him to make the best of it?
I think this is perfect. I mean, Jim Ross gets that intimacy when he does these interviews, and I think it's really, like, as you were talking about the Wardlow one. I mean, even up to this day, he still does it with such class, such regard on a character building, and I think this is maximizing your full potential with Jim Ross. You have him do these sit down interviews. You have him get the very serious, this is the story, this is the destination, this is where we're going, and that's what Jim Ross does so damn well, man.
So we also, on this same show, after the main event match where Bradley and Candido were teaming up, Cactus Jack debuted, and they said he got the biggest pop of the night. And he did an interview saying he's come in for humanitarian reasons because he knows Candido and Tammy mistreat Bradley and want to get to the bottom of it. So Cactus Jack in this interview said he loves dogs, that he wants to make sure that Boo Bradley is taken care of. And Boo Bradley lost his TV title that same night, which, again, the TV title has been jumping all over the place. And we can talk about the lineage of that title another time. But Colton, Cactus Jack is here, man. And Smoky Mountain Wrestling 1994, we are seeing the emergence of the personality. We're a year away from him really getting that ECW stuff under his belt, which we covered extensively throughout Shot of Nostalgia season 2, I should say. But your thoughts on Cactus Jack here, and were you surprised to see him?
Yes, surprised to see him. He fits very well, so very happy to see him here. I'm a huge Cactus Jack mark. I mean, even this early on in his run as Cactus Jack, he's going to bring a good pop. I love the angle that he's here because he's concerned about Boo Bradley or Ball that he's here to make sure that if they're changing out his pen and making sure he's not sitting in his own excrement and he's actually getting fed. It's just a really great, very nice tongue-in-cheek angle that we get to see from Mick Foley here. But yeah, man, love seeing Cactus Jack. My favorite version of Mick Foley is Cactus Jack. So yeah, this is he fits really well here. And after a rough couple months with Jake coming on the scene and then no showing, it's nice to get somebody in here that's going to bring a little lifeblood into the promotion.
So they took the humanitarian thing as literal as you can. So we saw a segment with Cactus and Lee announcing they were forming a tag team at Thanksgiving Thunder. Bradley came out and told Cactus he was sorry about what happened the week before. Tammy comes out with a cat, a literal cat, who turns out the name is Boots, acts like she's going to strangle the cat if Bradley doesn't listen to her, and which he does, and left. Cactus then said, and I quote, "This isn't the first time a little pussy has messed with a man's mind." Crowd popped, And Meltzer said, I hope when the cat got involved, you could see that line coming. And the idea coming out of this is supposed to be a takeoff on The Undertaker with Bradley eventually going to face. And whenever he's getting killed, the face manager would hold up the cat like Paul Bearer does with the urn, and Bradley would get magical powers. So, all right. So, Belcaster, break this down for me a little bit. Your thoughts on this possibly working? I understand. Throw yourself in 1994. I know The Undertaker is a hot commodity at this point. 1994, He's only 4 years into his existence in that character. He's main eventing this year's SummerSlam, all that stuff. The fake Taker versus the Underfaker versus the Undertaker. Your thoughts on this?
This is wild. The fact that the cat's replacing the urn and giving Boo Bradley special powers, that is all over the fucking place, especially when he's trying to be a dog. I want to know what the hell they were on when they were coming up with this. This is some crazy out there shit. But listen, man, it works, right? at least you're gonna hope it does. We've seen crazier shit in wrestling. I'm picturing somebody holding up the cat and like Paul Bearer, like, oh yes, the power of the pussy. Yeah, mind-boggling, man.
Yeah, so again, this is one of those forgotten things throughout the history of wrestling, to the point where like even diehard ECW fans, maybe some people know that Balls Mahoney was Boo Bradley, but as you dig a little bit deeper, this is type of meta acting that Boo Bradley or Balls Mahoney had to do here to get him ready. And sometimes you get gimmicks that aren't the best. And we see some guys, and we see some guys have good gimmicks, Dirty White Boy, and then goes over to WF and he receives a bad gimmick. But in a lot of ways, I know this is optimistic and silver lining type of stuff, Colton, but in a lot of ways, I think this character, as bad as it was, kind of helped Balls Mahoney come into his own, because you see a lot of the empathy in the Balls Mahoney character. That's this hardcore chair-wielding guy. You could see that he elicits a lot of emotion from the fans, and I think it might come from this, because he had to really dive deep into this character, and it taught him a different side of himself.
100%, man. And I think that, this, when we break it down like that, especially the reaction it's getting from the audience, this character is really not a whole lot far off from what Balls Mahoney and ECW became. So this is also just think it shows the commitment level of Balls Mahoney, and then also just his talent level of like, another situation of making chicken salad out of chicken shit, man. We're going to give you a gimmick where Tammy Fitch is going to walk you around like a fucking dog. Do your best. So, like, we're still here talking about it almost 30 years later. Yeah. Like, and it was not, like you said, we've seen Undead Mummies. We've seen Kendo the Samurai. We've seen another Kendo the Samurai versus Kendo the Samurai. we've seen a lot of weird shit through this year. And this is definitely, I liked this better than Prince Karras. I'll say that for sure.
So on the October 17th, 1994, they're talking about morale in the locker room seems to be up after the last TV, because Ron West, Cactus Jack, and Jim Ross were there and everything ran smoothly. He continues, it looks like Boo Bradley's going to get a major babyface push. Also speaks to having some people in the back. You mentioned Casey O'Connor being a lot of the production side of things, Colton, but guys like Cactus Jack, Ron West, and we know Jim Ross, how much he knows about the business. Even in 94, he's already seen a lot of wrestling. That can kind of steady the ship, where it's not just Jim Cornette reacting to things in guerrilla and sitting there and being upset with how things are going, with a lot of veterans there that are like not just providing support for in-ring stuff. You can imagine Ron West, Jim Ross, and even Mick Foley are back there sort of steadying as a steady hand here, and helps them kind of identify there needs to be some level of consistency.
Yeah, 100%, man. And this is a good group of guys to have around you, especially when you've been spending the last 3 to 4 months doing it on your own. I mean, I think just like we were talking earlier about, was Jim Ross being used to his full potential here. And I'm sure, aside from the confrontation segment and him doing the play-by-play call with Les Thatcher, he's definitely getting his money's worth out of Jim Ross and the backstage scene for sure.
So during this week, they announced the tag team title change on television over the weekend. And they did this on the house show, which is interesting because the Gangsters, as we know, are a top act. We're waiting for the moment that they're crowned. And here we are in an interview here announcing that they won the titles on a house show. And this is how it went down. Bob Armstrong did an interview with the Rock and Roll Express. Bob Armstrong said the Gangsters went to a powerful Atlanta civil rights law firm, which had ties to rich people in New York and California, and threatened a civil rights lawsuit. Bob said the new commissioner decided that even if they won the court case, the legal fees would be too high and it would threaten to put Smoky Mountain Wrestling out of business. And it would be better just to turn the belts over to the Gangsters and make sure they defended them against the Rock and Roll Express. Ricky Morton did an interview and said how embarrassed they were to be handing the belts over without losing them. And then they aired a 10-minute long video of the Gangsters celebrating to set up the angle that will run Rock and Roll next week. All right. So what, like, I don't understand why you do this. Is this just to get more heat on the Gangsters, Belcast, or do you feel like this is because how do you wrestling 101 is having someone win in the ring? There's no reason why the lawsuit wouldn't just force them to have a match where they would cheat to win and then they're the champions. What is the good of awarding them the titles? Am I missing something?
No, this is fuckery to the fullest, man. It makes no sense for them to do it this way. I mean, even like trying to comprehend it now, like I'm still like, what the hell? What was the point? That like there's point A, B, C, right? They took B out of it, put it before A, and then they just took C completely out of the equation. It's crazy though. I think maybe it worked to get more heat on them, but I mean, why not just do the damn match? Like why couldn't they just call it and be like, yeah, man, the court said you have to defend the titles against the Gangsters here, and then make it something impactful for the fans, not just like, oh shit, it happened. Yeah, they just handed the belts over, all good. Like, don't worry about it.
Dude, I think that they just love rock and roll chasing. That's when they were best. I think we were talking about the rock and roll chasing the belts, but like you just said, cheat to win, take the belts off them and have them chase. Colton, like your thoughts on this?
I mean, I guess it's just another way to get heat on the Gangsters, but to me, the Gangsters don't really need much more heat. They're getting great heat. But I will say, in a Southern wrestling promotion, attributing anything to liberal lawyers in California and New York is a really great way to get a fucking grumble out of rural folks. Man. So just when that line did really stick out to me, and especially kind of given the attentions of the times, I thought that was a pretty almost like a little too cheap of a jab for them to put a little more heat on the Gangsters. But I mean, hey, they did it and it worked, obviously. But yeah, kind of strange to me. It just seems like to me that this might have been something that we did their first like 3 weeks here, like their first attempt at going at rock and roll. So it didn't seem necessary, but I'm assuming it was just a way to try to add a little more heat to a pot that's already seeming to boil over.
So even though the announcement hadn't aired on TV, they had the Gangsters with the belts at the house shows in that run. So 10-8 in Johnson City drew 659 for an average show. They had the loser whipped match with Dirty Boy and Bruiser Bedlam, mostly in the main event with the Gangsters and rock and roll. We had the debut of AC Connor with the Gangsters, with Mustafa, the whole crew there brought to the ring. No DQ, no time limit main event, where the Gangsters did get the win. So it makes me think, like, again, why couldn't you just have the Gangsters win the titles in this match? I do understand what you're saying, Colton. There's something really cheap about them just giving the titles because the world was inherently racist and like they deserve the titles kind of stuff. Like, but I think it would have had a little bit more because really the way the Gangsters were being booked in the ring, they're tough sons of bitches. So like that's part of it. And I don't know. Listen, I trust the genius of Cornette. Maybe he has something bigger in mind. I'd like to hear him talk about this in long form if it's out there. But yeah, I just think there was more meat for them to win the titles and have them chase, because I feel like it's worse instead of stripping them of the titles than having to watching them get beat up badly and then be screwed out of them. I don't know. I think that holds more weight.
Yeah. No, and forfeit is never a good taste for pro wrestling.
So we go October 24th, 1994, and we have a mixture of good and bad news in the past week. By all accounts, the first show of the new TV format aired on 10/15 in the territory and was said to be 100% improvement, not only in announcing with Jim Ross replacing Bob Caudle, but in lighting, editing, and production. It still looks very, I don't even know the word. Like, what would be the word? Like simple, but the production is still very low budget, very simple.
Low budget.
It does look better though, and I understand. Like the announcing takes it to the next level. If you watch a product with bad announcing, it becomes almost unwatchable. And with Jim Ross there, and I'm not saying Bob Caudle was a bad announcer. He isn't. I think he's a good announcer. But there's something about Jim Ross that creates this soundtrack that feels good. And with guys like we mentioned before, Ron West and Jim Ross behind the scenes production-wise, recognizing that if you guys want to compete with, not even compete, if you want to be able to be a wrestling show that's taking seriously and draw big crowds, the little things have to have some nuance to them. And I think about this all the time when I'm doing the graphics for these shows. I'm like, all right, let me pull up the Big Apple Brawl logo. Well, guess what? There's not one that exists. There aren't logos. There aren't any graphics. And Volunteer Slam, not a logo in sight. Night of Legends, they re-released the logo. It looks like Ring of Honor re-released the Ring of Honor font. But yeah, I mean, thoughts on this, Belcaster, about production-wise? I mean, a little bit goes a long way. We see AEW putting people in place to make their product look better, and the same was being said in '94 at Smoky Mountain.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, we've covered so much already here on Shadow Nostalgia, but I mean, production is, I mean, that killed a lot of our hype for the ECW stuff because the production was not that good. So you take those small steps, and like you said, not to be a competitor, to be considered, a top promotion, something that's very important in the pro wrestling industry. I think those little improvements help a long way. And of course, having Jim Ross on the mic during commentary is going to help. I mean, the lighting, all that shit it's important to the overall package, man.
So we also had the bad. So we talked about the good. The bad is the 1014 show in Knoxville drew the smallest crowd in the promotion's history in the city, 481 fans for the No DQ Gangsters and Rock and Roll Express title match and loser gets whipped match with Dirty White Boy and Bruiser Bedlam. So Colton, we look at this number. 481 is a bad number. We watched them do it upwards of 5,000 is at their peak. 481. Do you think this is I guess, an indoctrination on what they're doing causing controversy, or is this just the product not being hot?
I think it's got to be just the product not being hot, because I mean, Knoxville is, for better or worse, we kind of have to consider that like hometown for them. This is like I think of this as their home base, especially, because they're running these shows at the Civic Center, pulling almost 5,000 people. I mean, I'm just going to come out and say it. I know we're going to get to it later as we break down the weekly TVs, but the Bruiser Bedlam Dirty White Boy program fucking sucks. It's boring. It's boring, man. Yeah. Like it is. And I mean, I know they're playing the hand that they're dealt at this point with that picture, but I mean, it's just, if that's supposed to be the best you've got to offer, and the tag title picture is way hotter right now, but it, like you mentioned, it could be some controversy from that. I mean, like, you're in a part of the country where, racial tensions are very much a real thing. And then you're running the Gangsters with this gimmick. Like, I could see that being some old, grandmas being like, yeah, I'm not going to go out and see, I'm not going to go to the show. I'm not going to see them. Some of these people might've been scared, man, of the LA South Central Gangsters coming to their town, who knows? But I mean, I think a lot of it is just the fact that, Bruiser Bedlam's been a company guy as soon as he's been here to do the job and make the town ever since he showed up. But damn, brother, it's just kind of a dud. Like every time, and just putting him in a main title program is just not working for me.
I feel like it feels like a mixed bag, and it's a multiple things. I think a piece of it is exactly what you're saying. The two things: product's not hot, the top program is not great. But I also think running the same city over and over again, we watched even on a big scale AEW when they ran Chicago over and over and over again. Eventually the crowd becomes lesser than. Everyone's like, what's wrong with the product? Well, the accessibility is what's wrong. If you have the ability to say, nah, I'll check it out next week, when you run the same building over and over again, there either has to be something that brings you in the door that you can't miss, or there needs to be that rarity of them coming to your city. And that's not the case. As you mentioned before, Knoxville's like their hometown where they know, all right, we won't show up on October 14th, but we'll be back October 21st or near Halloween, or maybe we'll come back in November. Like, oh, we got something. The kids got sports this weekend. We don't need to go. So part of that is, as we see now with even here on Long Island, the tickets for, UBS Arena where the Islanders play was really bad. The first time sold out in 25 minutes, but when you come back over and over again, they're running Jersey and they're running Arthur Ashe, and they're running all these areas in between. Eventually the fans get kind of inundated with saying, I may not have the money or the time. So, and add in that also the other pieces of the controversy with the Gangsters, and then also add on Dirty White Boy, Bruiser Bedlam. It's a mixed bag where only 481 fans show up, and it's sort of your fault because of what you're doing.
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head with the oversaturation of the market. That was something I hadn't realized. Yeah, they hit Knoxville every single month, sometimes more than once. They don't miss it. And, Knoxville's the biggest town they run in this territory, man. And there's, not to mention, there's other, like you said, kids got sports this weekend. There's other shit to do in a big city, man. It's not like you go to these places like, you know, Barberville, Kentucky, or Jellicoe, Tennessee, and like it's a town of 2,000 people or less, and you're, you know, anybody and everybody are packing into the gym to see this show at the high school. You know, Knoxville's they got more to compete with.
So we had a conversation on the phone between Jim Cornette and Casey O'Connor this past week. Meltzer says it was civil, although they didn't come to an agreement. Jim Cornette attempted to pay for the damage to O'Connor's car in exchange for O'Connor's dropping the charges against him. So we'll continue to follow this story. Ultimately, we know the charges were dropped. It's nice to see that this far between, I mean, a month has passed and they're able to have a civil conversation on the phone. This is, as Belcaster said, sometimes it's just the wrestling business, man. Sometimes people get mad at each other, and nothing like a situation like this to bring people together and have a conversation about what was really bothering him, because Jim Cornette clearly needed therapy, man. You mentioned he was stressed out. Casey O'Connor was the unfortunate recipient of all that stress, like Jake fucking Roberts.
Dude, and this at this point in the saga, it sounds like O'Connor kept the fucking $300 camcorder, because the first exchange was like, I'll pay for the damages when you return my fucking camcorder. And now he's saying, I'll pay for the damages, just please drop the charges. So it sounds like Casey O'Connor got a camcorder out of the situation. So good for him.
There's something so great about two guys that have an extreme issue together, and they admit that the other one's not fabricating it, and they both have an ultimate respect about the way they tell the story. When Jim Cornette talks about Casey O'Connor, there's this reverence about, yeah, we hate each other. Yeah, he could be a ball buster. Yeah, I don't like him. Same thing with Jim Cornette. Like, there's something great about the honesty about each other, where they both admit they're wrong, but also understand that they wanted what they wanted to make things right. Something great about that, because the fabrication part in pro wrestling, as we see with the Brawl out situation, we never really get the facts. There's something really satisfying about the newsletter being correct, Casey O'Connor confirming that, Jim Cornette confirming that, and then them getting together like, yeah, this is exactly what happened. We couldn't get along, and I smashed his fucking car up.
Almost never happens in the wrestling business to get all three of those sources on the same page.
So the final piece of the October 24th newsletter is the Dennis Coralluzzo NWA shows are now being billed as Smoky Mountain Wrestling shows on 11/17 in South Philly at Stanton Hall, which is pretty close to the ECW Arena. They have 11/18 in Pleasantville, New Jersey, 11/19 in Cherry Hill for an NWA tournament. We have Eddie Gilbert involved in this. We'll cover it on this for Smoky Mountain Wrestling's involvement. Kind of ho-hum, not as like eventful as you think it would be. Trying to attach their horse to NWA, which even in '94 was sort of a dying brand. We're about to see Shane Douglas toss down the NWA title and declare it the ECW title. So, which is one of the reasons, because it's a dying brand. And even today, it's one of those fledgling type of things where people are waxing and pining for the nostalgia of NWA. But even in '94, it did not have the appeal that a company like Smoky Mountain Wrestling really needed to be successful tying themselves to it.
Wow.
Going to October 31st, 1994, a young Stephen Acefield, Halloween day. I'm probably getting some candy somewhere. I'm just thinking about myself at 5 years old. What a great day that probably was, October 31st.
Hell yeah.
We have schedule is pretty light this past week. Only one show this week was 10/21 in Fleming, Neon, Kentucky. First time we've seen this city, Colton. Any sort of idea about Fleming, Neon, Kentucky? I love the name.
Yeah, it's a great name. It is around these parts just referred to just as Neon, Kentucky. It is it's far like southeast. It's like so it's in Letcher County, which is like on the border of Tennessee, and it's one of the smallest towns they've ever run, man. It is as of 2020, the population was 548.
Whoa.
And it was probably right about 800 in 94. So
wow.
Good stuff there. And we also, to kind of finish it up here, the TV Barroom Brawl with the Gangsters and Rock and Roll Express aired, and Meltzer said it wasn't as wild as one would expect. Wonder where the bar is, though, at this point. No pun intended, but the bar that has been raised for the wild stuff between the all-out brawl that they had throughout the arena. What would you expect? I mean, maybe he was expecting New Jack with the cart. We just weren't there yet. He wasn't that New Jack yet. We will see that playing the music over the air with it blaring as he's hitting people in the head with a cookie sheet. That's what we probably were expecting. It just wasn't there in Smoky Mountain. Can you imagine he did that though? And they're playing Ice Cube over the speakers as he's just smashing people with shit. Natural Born Killers. Like, it would have been insane.
It would have been absolutely insane.
you would have had old roll Mamaws passing out in the fucking aisle, dude.
Turn that shit down. All right. Well, that's the newsletter.
Great.
Let's get our fix and talk about all the TV results from September and October of 1994.
Get your fix.
All right, Hogan, get your fix. We're all sipping on our drinks here. Smoky Mountain Wrestling TV from 9/3/1994, Saltville, Virginia. 4 matches on deck. We have Tracy Smothers defeating Brian Logan. The TV championship on the line. Lance Storm defeated Chris Hammer to retain the title. Bruiser Bedlam defeated Doug Dalton. And the tag team champions on the line. Rock and Roll Express defeated the Gangsters to retain the titles. Look at that match. Perfect opportunity just to take the titles off of them if you want the Gangsters to win. But nevertheless, here we go. So before I get into like the angles and development stuff, Colton, your thoughts on these 4 matches? Anything that stand out to you?
I mean, nothing necessarily too crazy. It's not a bad show by any means. I love Doug Dalton's name. I think it's one of the best alliteration names in wrestling. As soon as I heard, I was like, oh man, Doug Dalton, I love that. But yeah, nothing too crazy. Just kind of continuation of some stuff we've seen towards the end of August as well. But yeah, not a bad lineup.
So the highlight of the show for me was the Gangsters interview to end the program. New Jack cuts a really good promo, says 2 wrongs don't make a right, and they're setting the tone for what's going to happen in the days to come. And he said, they may lose matches, but we don't lose fights, which I love that mindset. They're just beginning a whole lot of trips to the hospital. Rock and Roll Express, keep this in mind. We are the wrong people to mess with. He didn't use the word people. They used the actual word on TV. Thoughts on this, Belcaster? The Gangsters. I mean, New Jack is next level because I don't think he's playing a character. Like, he's not cutting a promo, dude. He's just talking from his heart.
Well, that's the thing with New Jack. We never figured that out if he was ever like fully in character, if he was just fucking balls to the walls crazy. But this is top tier New Jack, man. I mean, this is up there with some of his best ECW stuff. What a promo. I mean, the guy was captivating as hell to me. Like, even if he's pushing those boundaries, I mean, this is the best place to do it, right? It's so good. It works so well for the times, so well for the location. Great for the program against Rock and Roll. I just wish we would have had the goddamn title, man.
I wish there was some way to quantify that in Pro Wrestling 2023, where you can lose matches but win fights type of stuff. And I'm trying to think the equivalent to that character, but I know it does exist where you're going to take some guys down with you. I mean, you can look at Darby Allin. He wins probably more than he loses. John Moxley, same thing. But that type of mindset where a piece of you is being taken in the match, whether it's a fight or not. And I just like the mindset, Colton. I think the Gangsters have a really cool aesthetic that leave you like, this might be real.
Oh yeah, there's the lines of reality and performance are extremely hard to define here, and I just love the Gangsters as an opponent for the Rock and Roll Express, man. And it's really the juxtaposition of the two teams just couldn't be any more opposite. It's wonderful. It's you have the two Southern heartthrobs with mullets going against these this literal gang of dudes from South Central LA. They never come to the ring. It's never just Mustafa and New Jack. They come with the entire posse, and sometimes as many as 3 to 4 guys. And it's good shit, man. This has been my favorite feud so far in Smoky Mountain Wrestling.
Moving to 9/10/1994 TV from the same Saltville, Virginia, taped on the same day. Chris Candido defeated Steve Skyfire. TV championship defended. Lance Storm defeated Boo Bradley by DQ. The Gangsters got a win against Anthony Michaels and Doug Dalton. Anthony Michaels is the roommate of Casey O'Connor. And Bruiser Bedlam and Killer Kyle defeated Dirty White Boy and Tracy Smothers. So 4 matches on the docket. Boo Bradley kind of showing an edge to himself. He attacked Brian Logan. He challenged Lance Storm for the match. Bradley clearly is a little bit green here. He's still trying to get his legs. So we've got to remember, he just started in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. I think this might have been his 2nd or 3rd match altogether. He tried a crossbody on Lance Storm, could not hit it. Even Lance Storm, who at this point is well-traveled, a guy who's always been a natural in the ring, couldn't really carry Boo Bradley to a match that looked anything sort of passable, Belcaster. But, I mean, Balls Mahoney was never known for his work rate, which, again, you give him a pass, but he was really green here. The footwork was off.
No, absolutely. I mean, he was green in ECW in 95. I mean, even going into 96, 97. The fact that Lance Storm can't make you look good, that's a tell of how fucking green you are. But I still love the idea of Boo Bradley going after, the titles, getting his feet underneath them, building up that character. It works. And it's cool, but I mean, yeah, we're all green at some point, damn.
So they're still continuing a lot of the stuff that we've been seeing. Dirty White Boy and Bruiser Bedlam, that's been going on. And Jim Cornette's trying to figure out who the new commissioner is. And I don't really think they actually know who the commissioner is at this point, but they are passing along. Cornette saying, I want to manage the Smoky Mountain Wrestling Heavyweight Champion. And he says, I believe Bruiser Bedlam is that guy to win the title. And then during the main event, one of the finishes, he tosses some alcohol in the eyes of Bob Armstrong to put the good guys at a disadvantage. Smothers hammers away on Bedlam and Kyle to start the match. The crowd was really flat for this match, but Bob Armstrong got him going after the match, kind of getting whatever out of his eye after the finish. And the basic tag match kind of got a good pop at the end with Bruiser Bedlam and Killer Kyle getting the win, but in the main event. But yeah, that was really the highlight of the show. Pretty simple week. Definitely more interested in the tag title stuff, Colton. As you referenced before, it's the best thing we're seeing on TV, if not all year. But the main event is really dragging things down like an anchor beyond words.
Yeah, most definitely. And I mean, some of that's going to be, like you said, the crowd was kind of flat here. Some of that's just going to come from, this is the second taping they're doing multiple tapings. It's always hard to keep a crowd hot. But yeah, the main event here, I think probably needed to be the Gangsters versus, the Gangsters defeating Anthony Michaels and Doug Dalton and getting an interview, because it's just really anything with Bruiser Bedlam seems to kind of be dragging things down, man. I mean, Dirty White Boy and Tracy Smothers, love them both to death, but I mean, especially if they're not going over, the crowd's not going to be hot about that.
The other thing too to think about, Chris Jericho, who allegedly is finished with Smoky Mountain Wrestling for a bit as he's finishing up other dates, and his forearm was broken. So Lance Storm's on his own here, brought in as a package for the Thrill Seekers. He was supposed to be this tag team that was put to the top of the card immediately. Now he's on his own. They put the TV title on him, Belcaster, and kind of a glimpse into his future where he'd be a single star IC champion. He's a guy who in ECW was competing on a singles level as well.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on Lance Storm making the best of this? Maybe it was like a blessing in disguise that he was able to work singles because maybe he would have been masked in a tag team a bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's weird because they always bring in these characters and it's like a really shoddy game of Jenga. Like one brick falls down and the whole thing collapses, and Lance Storm's just on top of the pile of little logs, man, standing strong with the TV title. I think it's good that he got his singles kind of build up here, and I think it worked a lot in his favor for his singles career in the future. I don't, maybe coming in with Chris Jericho, he wasn't fully. He didn't have the muscle to get out there and do things by himself, but having Jericho hurt himself and kind of getting the spotlight put on him, I think it was great for Lance Storm in the whole overall picture.
On 9/17/1994 from Cumberland, Kentucky, we had three matches this time. Bruiser Bedlam defeating Steve Skyfire, our local enhancement. Smoky Mountain Wrestling Heavyweight Champion Dirty White Boy defeated Mike Moraldo by DQ. Boo Bradley and Chris Candido defeated Brian Lee and the TV champion Lance Storm. The opener of the show was interesting because they opened the footage from Freedom Hall where the Gangsters and Rock and Roll Express brawled into the parking lot, other wrestlers trying to separate them. And after the introduction by the commentators, we also go to unedited footage of the match between the Rock and Roll and Gangsters from Johnson City. At one point in the match, Ricky Morton is thrown over the top rope. He's hung over the top rope. Robert Gibson made the save. The referee, who we now know is Mark Curtis with the suspenders and the mullet, is sent out of the ring as the match loses any control. Wrestlers enter the ring. They try to restore, but it simply didn't work. And then we see the Gangsters kind of brawling with the whole locker room and trying to say, like, I know this is a match and you're trying to win it, but tossing Ricky Morton and trying to hang him from the top rope, that's not going to fly. We're all going to come out and defend him. And the Gangsters fighting everybody off. You got the Gangster security. Kind of an awesome way to open the show. Unfortunately, it was taped. This was at a house show. But this immediately enthralled me. Like, damn, this is what's the most interesting thing they're doing on TV.
Well, and this shows at this point that they know it as well, because that's how they're opening the show, man. It's it's unfortunate for the crowd here in Cumberland. This, that they're just getting told this by JR and Les Thatcher at this point, but this was, we talked about the production value going up, man. You start to see it. And I know this is before we still got Bob Caudle at this point on the 17th, but I mean, I think we can already start to see it happening here where it's not just them editing in, stuff that happened at a big show, weeks prior, just for the sake of filling some time. They're continuing the story from week to week here, and they're going with what the best thing they've got going, which is the Gangsters versus Rock and Roll Express.
100%. And they go to a Gangsters interview, and New Jack is right in front of the mic, and he's screaming at the screen, saying he told them he would get them. He told them they would do it South Central LA style. He said, we're going to get you again, choke the life out of you. And he leaves a message. He's like, my mission is to make sure that the Rock and Roll Express are dead like Elvis. Man, like they are absolutely just energy personified, and opening a show with the Gangsters, their personality shines through. And I like the aesthetic of, it's not about wins and losses now. It's not about pinning the Rock and Roll Express. They want to take a piece of them with them. And that makes it real. It goes beyond wrestling, where it's not even about the championships. They want the championship for other reasons than taking away from Smoky Mountain Wrestling. They want to control the narrative and take a piece of Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson with them, Belcaster.
Yeah, no, they're out for blood, and that makes any feud that much better when all the shit that is involved in pro wrestling, the titles, the pageantry, all that shit goes out the window. And it's as New Jack gets so serious when he's doing these interviews, man, you feel it. And that's how it should be. That's how those big blood brawls, those damn blood feuds should be.
And the main event here was pretty good. I mean, Storm and Candido is a cool tandem, and Boo Bradley and Chris Candido is an interesting tandem, obviously, with the dog and stuff. They're making the best out of it. It's fine for what it was. I mean, I wasn't enthralled with the in-ring work. I do like the personality, especially what they became. And it's also fascinating to see, like I mentioned before, Balls Mahoney as this character coming to his own. I would say with Brian Lee getting his hands on Chris Candido after everything that went down with him, seeing him back in the fold, that was interesting because of all the heat they built up, having him back to get his hands on Chris Candido, and Chris Candido playing that heel to escape. Again, very similar to MJF. You couldn't really get his hands on him. Like he's covered in melted butter. He couldn't find him. But really for this show, I mean, and the last couple shows, it's really just been about the Express and the Gangsters and getting that going. And you're really telling that they're putting all their eggs in that basket. And maybe it's because that's so good, everything feels lesser than Colton, but I thought it's a one program show.
It is. And I mean, they are doing the best that they can with this Boo Bradley and Chris Candido. I like the idea of Brian Lee coming back as a babyface. I'm enjoying that side of him, but it is a much lesser storyline. One thing I wanted to say, and if, to the fans watching, if you guys haven't gone back and watched any of the September TVs with Chris Candido, you can find them on YouTube pretty easily. Chris Candido's walking around with this bonnet on. He looks like a fucking baby wearing a bonnet, but he's covering up the hack job of a haircut he got, and it's really hilarious because he looks like just a big muscly baby. It's hilarious.
And so good. It reminds me of when Kurt Angle wears the wig and the headgear after you referenced that match with Edge getting his head shaved, but it's so good. And then also, I mean, Vince McMahon started wearing the do-rag because he was bald too after he got shaved at WrestleMania 23. Yeah, all that stuff it's so good because Chris Candido, even though the hack job isn't as bad as it probably everyone thought it was, because as you mentioned, his hair is like this long, blonde.
I think what it is because he sells to everybody that he's got naturally blonde hair, but he obviously absolutely does not. It's bleached, so as it's growing back, it's not naturally blonde. So he's hiding that to protect what little ego he has left at this point.
Saving some money on some bleach or peroxide.
So fantastic. And we have Cumberland, Kentucky, more of the tapings from 9/24/1994. 3 matches on deck. The Gangsters opening up, defeating Anthony Michaels and Brian Logan. We got Boo Bradley defeating the TV champion Lance Storm to win the championship. And Bob Armstrong's in action. He defeated Killer Kyle by DQ. So before we cover the Boo Bradley winning a championship so early on in his career, and the TV title is almost meaningless at this point. It's bouncing around like a hot potato. We have a Gangsters interview following their victory over Anthony Michaels and Brian Logan, and Mustafa's holding a noose with him. So New Jack wonders if the Rock and Roll thought they were soft and easy. He says the Express are in for the fight of their life, and they're going to hurt them if he doesn't care what it's going to take and to bring it to the ring, and we're going to take you guys out. And he said, I'm coming here to get paid and put an end to the myth that they created Rock and Roll because the Gangsters did, and they let them borrow it for a while. So another like one-off line where they leave you like, man, that was fire. And the match itself, like, not great. Anthony Michaels and Brian Logan are just kind of becoming this enhancement level talent, but Nice to see the Gangsters get a win and then come out firing, heavy breathing, sweating from the match, holding a noose and threatening to hang Rock and Roll Express from the top of the tallest building, Colton. Insane.
Yeah, it's they're bringing the heat, man. It is it's incredibly dark like with the noose. It's good shit though, man. I mean, like you could not have gotten a better pair of guys to do this gimmick. I mean, New Jack is and like, you know, Mustafa doesn't just get as much time on the mic, but his facial expressions are absolutely fucking incredible, man. Like he just looks geetered out of his mind at all fucking times. Like his eyes look like they're about to pop out of his skull. They're a lot of fun to watch, man. And yeah, I think you're right. You know, they're just getting them against enhancement talent for the most part right now. Like we've said many times, Smoky Mountain Wrestling is not about the work rate, but boy, it does come off. Their promos are a lot better when they're, you know, blown up and sweating all over the place. So,
oh yeah, and we referenced that Boo Bradley match where he wins a TV title, a really quick match because of the aforementioned greenness that our friend Boo Bradley has, but. This match was more angle advancement as the action was pretty scattered and most of the story outside the ring. Brian Lee getting involved, brawling with Candido. Lance Storm kind of distracted. Boo hits him with the chain in the face and pins Lance Storm. Candido hits another wrestler with a pile driver, and we know he's going to be suspended again. Maybe has another tour in all Japan. Who knows? But Brian Lee gets hit with the pile driver, and now again, Smoky Mountain Wrestling has to be like, dude. We got to suspend you and fine you again. So when I saw it, I'm like, and it's funny because the pile driver is a pile driver, but during this, knowing he just came back from the suspension, I'm like, dude, you can't do it again.
It's just filler pieces, man. He's just trying to get out there, get his shit in, take another siesta.
It's unreal, but
yeah.
Pile drivers are awesome, and maybe if they're used sparingly, it would have more of an effect. And also, I would still, especially covering Jake Roberts at length during the Smoky Mountain run, bring back the DDT as a finish.
Oh, hell yeah.
It'd be awesome.
Absolutely. Speaking of pile drivers, just because it popped in my head, but like even in WWE when it was gone forever and Cena busted out, I think he was fighting Punk, you know, and he just did
did it to Cena, yeah.
Yeah, and it was just it was one of those like holy shit. It was as big as any like cage match or anything. You're just like, no shit, he just pulled that off, and like I mean, it's a very powerful tool when it's not present, right? That's the best.
I mean, even think about like the finish we talked about, the simple finishes, the punch from Big Show or the World's Strongest Slam is literally up and down. But if you sell a finish like you're dead, any finish could have an effect. Yeah. And that was the pile driver here, where if you hit that in the match, the ref is distracted. Of course, the management would see it, but the guy can stay down for 35. It doesn't matter. It's over. So we also have the Smoky Mountain Tag Team Champions, Rock and Roll Express, interviewed backstage at a recent live event. Morton talks about beating the Gangsters every time they've competed in the ring, and Morton says they can toss the rules out to retain the titles. Morton says the Gangsters came to Smoky Mountain Wrestling with zero respect, and at the end, you're going to respect us. So they're kind of dodging and weaving all the stuff that's being thrown their way, not sinking to their level. And Rock and Roll comes off as the most baby-faced team ever. They're trying to say, no matter what, at the end of this, you dudes are going to respect us. You're going to shake our hands in this ring, and we're going to walk out unscathed. And I love Rock and Roll Express as the baby-faced team chasing. They're so good at what they do and getting the fans to react, and I love it. Any thoughts on the Gangsters and Rock and Roll at this point, Colton?
Man, it's been a great program. Like we said, it's been the best thing that we've had going with Smoky Mountain for all of September and pretty much since it started. But yeah, this is I like this angle, man. And this was actually just from, I think the line that I wrote down in my notes from Ricky Morton was actually from the 910 episode, but he said that referencing, you know, the harsh promos coming from New Jack, that alligator mouth ain't going to be able to back up that hummingbird behind.
Wow.
Like, God, what a great line.
So good. And in the main event, according to my notes, Killer Kyle was supposed to team with Jim Cornette and against Bob Armstrong. But before the match, Jim Cornette came out with his arm in a sling and a neck brace to get out of wrestling. And Killer Kyle was buying, and he's like, yeah, no, Jim's hurt. That was me versus Bob Armstrong. So we also have Dirty White Boy getting involved, Bruiser Bedlam getting involved. This is just angle advancement stuff, but tale as old as time. Jim Cornette selling an injury not to be involved in the match because he did not want to link up with Bob Armstrong. After talking all that shit, they're always talking shit about each other as the opportunity, and he runs scared. I mean, Bob Armstrong is as protected as a character in Smoky Mountain Wrestling than anybody. He's like a god across these lands.
Yeah, no, I love Cowardly Cornette. Overselling the injury. He's got a sling on and a neck brace and the tennis racks wrapped up too. So good. So good.
So to culminate September, we have the Big Apple Brawl 1994, Paintsville, Kentucky from the Paintsville High School. And as we said before, we had some matches here, advancing storylines. It's not the most influential show as far as things go in Smoky Mountain Wrestling's lineage, but some matches to go over. Tracy Smothers defeating AC Connor, a.k.a. D'Lo Brown. Lance Storm defeated Boo Bradley by DQ. Dirty White Boy defeated Bruiser Bedlam by DQ to retain the Smoky Mountain Wrestling Heavyweight Championship. We had the Rock and Roll Express defeating the Gangsters to retain their tag titles. And we had Dirty White Boy, the Rock and Roll Express, and Tracy Smothers defeating Boo Bradley, Bruiser Bedlam, and the Gangsters in a Rage in the Cage 8-man tag match. So this is their version of War Games. Double duty, too. Like, makes you wonder, why wouldn't you just have undercard matches? There's other talent on the roster where you didn't have to have Dirty White Boy go twice. You didn't have to have Bruiser Bedlam go twice. Same thing. I mean, everyone went twice, and you really didn't have to, Colton.
Yeah, it's really odd, man, especially considering that it's, not a situation where like some of it was a this isn't a pay-per-view that people are buying. Like if this, you put the tag match where everybody's playing double duty on the pre-show or something, that would make sense to me. But it, I don't understand. I know the talent has been, you've got Chris Jericho hurt. You've got, Candido suspended at this point. But I mean, I think you've got enough talent to where these guys don't have to play double duty, or you don't necessarily have to involve our White Boy in Bedlam in the tag match. That was kind of an interesting choice to me. Also, something that might be confusing for folks, if you're wondering why this is called Big Apple Brawl, because most people, when you hear Big Apple, you think New York City. This is taking place in Paintsville, Kentucky. I can give you a little bit of clarification for that. Paintsville actually hosts the Kentucky Apple Festival annually every year in October. So first full weekend in October, the Apple Festival happens there. So that's where it gets its name.
Love
for
it.
Any of those wondering.
I was wondering myself. I was wondering if it was like akin to just the Gangsters being from New York, LA, that type of stuff, because they were referencing New York and LA. But Big Apple Brawl, I think it was called Big Apple Slam the year before or something like that. It wasn't Big Apple Brawl the year before, but so yeah, Big Apple Grapple was the 1993 one.
That's even better, man.
Yeah,
I like that.
I was gonna say, why take that beautiful
no grappling going on, man? I think the Gangsters changed the mindset. It's just brawling, so they had to change it. So
there you go. Good point.
It's raging in the cage, baby. Raging in the cage.
I think it also speaks volumes too. A couple things. It speaks volumes with this card too. When you see the hierarchy and how things are structured here, the world title being third just speaks volumes. The tag titles just mean more than them at this point. And you can make the argument too, Belcaster, 1995 for ECW. We said the same exact thing about the ECW world title. It meant really lesser than all the other titles. Even the TV title a lot of times meant more. And of course, I wonder what that is. Like, why is the world title not, in some promotions, not held to a high esteem?
No, and it's weird because these guys get painted in this like their champions just don't get booked properly, and then you're getting all these other hot programs that are overtaking that spot. It kind of takes the whole steam out of that heavyweight title picture. And I mean, this goes to ECW, Smoky Mountain. I mean, we even saw it a little bit in WWF in '98. I mean, when there was we went the longest without a champion for, months, right? It's crazy. So it's just a test of like, you don't need to actually put all the pressure on the heavyweight title picture. You rock the shit out of that tag team, rock the shit out of that TV title. I mean, it works when it works. And if it's working, man, you don't take your foot off the gas.
I understand that there's some talent that's green here, but what would be the harm in jumping Lance Storm to the top of the card, turning him heel and working Dirty White Boy instead of Bruiser Bedlam? Do something different. It's been Bruiser Bedlam and Dirty White Boy over and over again, to the point where it's insanity. It just feels like you're doomed to do this forever. It's purgatory level booking.
And unfortunately, it hurts. It hurts Dirty White Boy, who's not who you want to be hurting, man. This guy's been he really stepped up and carried getting the belt thrown back on him so fast with the issues with Jake, no showing shows. It's you think you would reward this guy for just really taking it on the chin and fucking trudging through week after week. Obviously hindsight's 2020, but Lance Storm versus Dirty White Boy sounds like a fucking incredible program.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's crazy that it just takes away from not just the actual programming, but the fans too. I mean, how many times can you watch these matches and wonder why they're not selling good ticket sales? I mean, how many times are you gonna watch Bedlam fucking fight Dirty White Boy?
Somebody,
No matter, no matter what. Like it sucks the wind out of the event, man.
It's insane. I mean, I feel like the world title picture for the last 9 months has been pretty much the same thing. Aside from inserting Jake Roberts in it, it's been a variation of Dirty White Boy, Brian Lee, and Bruiser Bedlam.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, other than that, Tracy Smothers has been involved in some capacity. Chris Candido had a dip he dipped his toe in. But yeah, Dirty White Boy, Bruiser Bedlam, Brian Lee have controlled the narrative of this whole division. And there's been no upward movement. I think also the vision of the fans just look at it as lesser than. It might as well be a mid-card title.
Yeah.
And you're saying, Bedlam is one of the 3 people controlling it. And Bedlam's he's never held the belt. He hasn't won it once. We've had 3 champions in 9 months, and one of the champions was just here for not even a cup of coffee, a shot of espresso.
Yeah, Nick Aldis' cup of coffee here. Where he sips it, drops it. Oh, I gotta go. I forgot something at home.
Yeah,
so
it's not an American large coffee. It's a European large.
So moving on to the 10-194 Smoky Mountain Wrestling TV from Cumberland, Kentucky. 3 matches on the docket. TV Championship defended. Boo Bradley successfully beats Brian Lee to retain the title. Lance Storm gets a win over Steve Skyfire. And Smoky Mountain Wrestling Tag Team Championship on the line. Rock and Roll defeated the Gangsters to retain the title. Opening segment was Bob Armstrong coming out with a surprise for Jim Cornette. Bob Armstrong says that he's tired of groups attacking people. And Armstrong says that Cornette's union, the fight union, has been dissolved as of right now. Jim Cornette comes over and is freaking out about the union being broken up. So question for you guys. We think about factions and they stay together as long as they want, running roughshod over rosters, Bloodline, Judgment Day, go down the list with Evolution, NWO back in the day. This changed the perspective of management has the opportunity to break factions up. And do you guys think there's something useful about that where you can say you guys are no longer allowed to team together in any capacity? Is there any sort of value to that?
I love it. I think that's cool. I think I wish they would do it more often. Imagine if, JJ Dillon came out and was like, no, we're suspending the NWO, right in the middle of their heyday, how much chaos it would cause. I mean, across the place. That's the best way to fuck with anything that's stable like that. Imagine I would love to see that in AEW right now. The Elite can't hang out anymore. You guys are fucked. It goes through your separate ways, man. It would make for really compelling storylines. I dig it, man. I think lost thing in pro wrestling that should probably be happening more often.
So yeah, I mean, I think about it this way because managers legit on the independents need to have an actual manager's license, and tag teams also probably, if you go by that logic, tag teams should have an official application to be a tag team. And I'm sure Smoky Mountain Wrestling had something kayfabe wise in turn with that. And I guess there's logic to say if there is a legitimate leadership team in a promotion, they could say you're no longer allowed to team together. And if you're no longer allowed to team together, how could you be a faction? You could be associated with each other, but if you're not able to manage somebody or also team with them, you can't be at ringside with them. So I guess you could not allow them, Colton, to be involved, right?
Right. It definitely places more of an emphasis on the authority in wrestling, which we've kind of seen we've moved away from in modern wrestling a little bit. But Belcaster, like you say, you want to see a little bit more. You'd love to see this in current day AEW. I feel like they kind of started hinting at this a little bit on this past Saturday in Collision. So during the ladder match with Andrade and Buddy Murphy, they had banned the rest of House of Black from being out there, but Ian Riccaboni referenced that Julia Hart has a manager's license. So even though she's a part of it's a technicality, even though she's technically part of the House of Black, she's allowed to be out here because she's paid her dues for her manager's license, and she is listed as his manager and can be out here. So I thought when I heard them address that, I was like, man, that's a kind of an odd tidbit of information. And then as I got to thinking about it more, like, oh no, that's really, really good, man. That's definitely harkening back to the wrestling structure of old, which I love.
Yeah. So just on Bruiser Bedlam, I'm not sure if you guys saw the Dark Side of the Ring episode that was talked about in episode 11 of the 3rd season, where they talked about his legal trouble and really sort of falling off the map and then his eventual death that was tied to the crime he was in. But he apparently many legal problems had to do when he was the president of the Hamilton, Ontario chapter of Satan's Choice Outlaw Motorcycle Club. after his income from his wrestling career dwindled following being fired from WWF for cocaine use in 1991. He started wrestling what was described as down market leagues. So he was involved in illicit steroids. There's a whole stuff. I don't want to spoil the episode for you guys, but he was involved and arrested multiple times, trafficking cocaine, 10 months in prison, following his time in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And a lot of the wrestling promoters didn't really know this was going on, and nor did they care. I think it was one of those things where if you looked good, you had a certain aesthetic, which he did. He looked like $1 million. Like, as far as wrestling bad guys go, he wasn't Jack by any means, but he looked like the classic bad guy from Tyson Knockout. You know what I mean? Like, he looked like that guy who'd be on the other side of the ring and be an intimidating force, maybe because he actually was. You know what I mean? Like, that's
sounds like it. Yeah.
So, you know, the Satan Motorcycle Club from Ontario, Canada. I mean, Johnny K9, as he was known in WWF Jobberland, where he was taking on Hulk Hogan and losing matches left and right on live events. You know, we see these Smoky Mountain Wrestling guys live in lore a little bit when you start poking around and figuring out what they went on to do. It's interesting. And the dark side of the ring stuff, I feel like it's serendipity, Belcast. We always talk about this, that it feels like it always comes up to the surface after we start digging, and like all of a sudden they're talking about it in Dark Side of the Ring, and people are seeing, like, I ran into Kevin Sullivan after talking about him on Smoky Mountain. I mean, on Shot Nostalgia season 1, ran into him that 2 weeks after we covered the first time he was involved in all his stuff going on behind the scenes. It was awesome.
No, it's crazy. I love that, you know, we speak these things into existence. We think them, we manifest it, man, and it just comes crawling out.
Well, even the Nitro stage, dude, come on, we got that.
The Nitro stuff, God, R.I.P. to Nitro stage. But yeah, 100%, man. But I mean, even the Candido being on Dark Side of the Ring while we're covering this, we just covered ECW. It's all crazy, man.
So really, we had that main event with the tag team title match, and really the match was pretty good. The promos have been stronger than the matches, but the matches have been the best thing work rate wise that we've seen. I mean, aside from the Candido Smothers ladder match, these tag matches, I mean, the Heavenly Bodies and Rock and Roll were awesome too, going almost an hour against each other. But other than that, we are sacrificing work rate for story, and sometimes the story's not even there. But we're seeing them try. They're trying their best on TV in a different capacity. And I also start to see some of the stuff that they're opening with, these cold opens into promos or visions back to what had happened the week prior. That's akin to a new format that they reference with Ron West and Jim Ross and other people that are kind of in charge of production now, giving insight, saying this is how it should be done. You don't want to open up to just a squash match. You got to bring people into the story and get them hooked.
Yeah, 100%, man. And you can tell, like, as soon as October TV hits, the lighting does look better. You know, Jim Ross is wearing a nicer suit than Bob Caudle wore, and it looks like Les Thatcher's dressed up a little bit to match. Like, they're bringing their A game once JR comes on the scene.
So moving on to 10-8 from Cumberland, Kentucky, 4 more matches to cover here. The title was on the line in the first match. Dirty White Boy defended against Steve Skyfire. Because you know what? Steve Skyfire deserves a match here. He is jobbed out every single week on Smoky Mountain Wrestling TV. I don't want to hear anyone rip on the AEW rankings. What the fuck did Steve Skyfire do? He gets a title shot. What are we talking about?
By my count, Steve Skyfire has never won a fucking match, but he's getting a shot. So, like, as if the Smoky Mountain Wrestling Heavyweight Championship needed anything else to bring it down. We're throwing Jobber McJobberson in with a shot at it. It's just it's bad booking, pal.
Bad booking, buddy.
I'm just continuing to look up the Bruiser Bedlam crimes. Look that stuff up and watch the episode. Just the stuff about bombs and things that man, it's insane. So you're never going to look at Bruiser Bedlam the same. Not that you looked at him in a positive way.
I'm going to quit talking shit on him too.
I just like I don't know. Brian Lee, I said was dead, but he's alive. So I think Bruiser Bedlam is dead. So
his motorcycle gang is probably still alive and well. Man. Those dudes hearing that.
Anyway, moving on here, as Hawk would like to say, we're going to the 10-8 1994. We covered the opening match here. The TV championship on the line. Boo Bradley defeated Mike Beraldo to retain the title. Robert Gibson defeated Brimstone, and New Jack and Robert Gibson won a battle royal. So we'll cover that in a second. We open up with the segment, as we referenced in the newsletter, the Rock and Roll Express being stripped of the tag titles and the Gangsters awarded the title. They're going to give us more information later on in the program. And we have a Dirty White Boy interview where he's continuing to target Bruiser Bedlam and Cornette. And then Tammy Fitch and Boo Bradley interviewed following Bradley's victory, and more Bradley stuff where he's being a dog and he's happy and he's like all that good stuff. Still our TV champ though. One of the better TV champs we've seen as far as reigns go, Colton.
Yeah, most definitely, man. And it's most of the time it's 1, 2, and if we are lucky enough to have a TV champion make it to 5 matches, the gimmick has been a couple of times that they take a $5,000 check and vacate the belt. So this is there's been a little bit more story involved with this one, to say the least.
So we were promised to hear more information about why Rock and Roll were stripped of the belts, and Bob Armstrong and the Rock and Roll share some thoughts regarding the Express being stripped of the titles. Armstrong says, "I don't know how to explain the situation, so we see footage of the match shown from last week. The Gangsters had actually pinned the Express, but it was restarted, and they lost seconds after the restart. And Armstrong says they had to give the belts to the Gangsters, and because the Gangsters went to a lawyer in Atlanta where they threatened to sue Smoky Mountain Wrestling because they're being discriminated against, Armstrong says the Express want to get the belts back rather than bankrupt the company. Bob apologizes to Morton Gibson, and Morton says they don't blame Armstrong, but rather the Gangsters. And Morton can't recall a time when someone had just taken the belts from them like this. And before it is over, the Gangsters will respect them." So before we move on to the Gangsters celebration in the streets and with the new car and pretty much a rap video, it was like watching, one of those 90s rap videos on TRL back in the day. That's what it really was. Belcaster, is this painted in a better light to you? Like the fact that because we've seen guys like this kind of takes wrestling and blows it up. If anyone gets a pin on somebody and the ref wasn't looking or they messed up the match, you can go back and change the finish of a whole bunch of matches.
Yeah.
This is bad precedent setting stuff for a promotion that says we abide by the rules. But do you think this was a good enough explanation by Bob Armstrong to get this going?
No, I think it was just as we were discussing earlier. I think it was just a thing for cheap heat for the game. It seems even more like it was just cheap heat, especially with, I could hear Ricky Morton, man. I don't blame Bob Armstrong. I blame the Gangsters, man. Like, you're just like, fuck, dude. Like, they're just trying to put more heat on them, and then them, of course, they're gonna sue Smoky Mountain because they feel discriminated against. It's all just cheap heat, man. Absolute cheap heat.
So as promised, we go to the street with a nice car, the tag titles over their shoulders, the Gangsters. New Jack says they have an area where they hang out to get away from all the rednecks in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. He says, "I believe we're going to have the tag titles for a long time." And he knows that Morton and Gibson wouldn't last 5 minutes in their area. So the video is just rap music and people hanging around and celebrating New Jack and Mustafa holding the tag titles. And Jack is telling everyone around the neighborhood that they have the tag titles. And he said he suggests if we would pawn the title, they would go, if he were to go broke, because he doesn't respect the gold in the title, because he doesn't care about it. He'd rather have the money and the fame. And he said he used to sit at the back of the bus, but now they own the bus. Jack says that Al Sharpton called him to say congratulations to the Gangsters for winning the titles. Really awesome segment here. This could have been on Impact if this had a little bit more production value. This could have been on AEW. This was old school type of stuff where, man, good character development, and they're the tag champs. I just hate that the Rock and Roll Express were not pinned in convincing fashion. That's the only thing I don't like.
Me too, man, because I think they had enough heat on them to be able to do it like this. It seems it's cheap. I don't love it, but I will say I do love seeing the tag straps over the shoulders of the Gangsters. I think it looks great. I love this segment. This was gold, man. This was really good, and I love. Yeah, they're damn right. I don't think the Rock and Roll Express would last 5 minutes in their part of town, especially with the celebration they had going on after bringing those belts back to the neighborhood.
So we go over to the 10/15/1994 TV from Morgantown, North Carolina. We have 4 matches on deck. Tracy Smothers defeated George South. The tag team champions defended their titles. The Gangsters defeated Sean Casey and Brian Logan. Brian Anderson defeated Steve Skyfire, and Scott Studd defeated the Beat the Champ Boo Bradley to win the title. So most notable about this show here in Morgantown, North Carolina, it's the debut of Jim Ross on commentary. Instantly, to me, the program feels different. It feels better. The new segment, as we referenced before, called Confrontation with Jim Ross. Everything about Jim Ross's ability to carry the program and the moves that he's calling and just building the story and talking about where people are from, it takes it to the next level. It speaks volumes about when we watch Collision and hear the announce team, that takes the program to the next level. Same thing with Dynamite. When Raw was at its worst, the announce team was bad. And I feel like they're interchangeably connected.
100%. And Jim Ross, I mean, I could hear him just swimming. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Like, it just rolls off the tongue like butter, man.
So we also have the Smoky Mountain Wrestling Tag Team Champions interviewed after their victory. New Jack says they had nothing to do with Ricky Morton getting attacked on the side of the street. And this is the thing I was talking about. This was to write off the fact that Ricky Morton missed the tapings the week before, where they had to do the show without them. And he pretty much said rock and roll's dead because we're the tag champs. So they're giving the Gangsters a lot of time on TV. The Rock and Roll Express they're carrying the product right now. The promotion's on the back of this program. And you really can't say more than that. They are continuing to show that this is the most valuable thing they've done. And it's really well done. And they put in a lot of eggs in this basket. I like the Gangsters are champions. We can be critical about how they were booked, but as far as getting there, but I do like finally they have the titles, even though they're really defeating jobbers. Every match on this card was pretty much garbage. Like every match was an enhancement match. It was like a WWF Superstars 1991 card with all down the list, but it still was pretty entertaining.
Yeah, this promo, this is the one I was referencing earlier, where New Jack basically accuses Ricky Morton of being a drunk and falling over in a nightclub and then trying to put the blame on them. It's great shit. Go back and watch it if you haven't seen it. And like you said, man, yeah, pretty much every match on this show was kind of a flop. The only thing that we got to see, even though it was an enhancement match, we did get to see the debut of Brian Anderson here, which is Ole Anderson's son, which was dude's got a really good look. He's rocking the Lemmy Lemmy from Motorhead facial hairstyle, and he's just as wide and broad as his dad. Yeah, man, kid looks good, and excited to see him here.
Yeah, and we also, as we referenced before during the newsletter, talked about extensively Cactus Jack making his ring down to ringside during the main event. Everyone didn't know this was happening. Jack distracted Boo Bradley. I mean, he's involved in this TV championship feud. He's interviewed following that match, and he says he didn't come here to cause any problems. He's here for a mission of mercy, humanitarian reasons, as we referenced, to kind of get to the bottom why Boo Bradley's being abused by Tammy Fitch and Chris Candido. And you can make the argument it's the most heroic thing he's ever done in his life. But all joking aside, it was cool to see Cactus Jack here. I'm interested to see how they're using him, but it's interesting to see them bring him in for an undercard feud, especially when the main event is so desperate for even in 1994, Cactus Jack would be a breath of fresh air in the main event, but they decided to use him in this undercard. Maybe they believe a lot in Boo Bradley, what he's bringing to the program.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of that. I also think they're really gung-ho on the tag picture right now. Like, they don't want to take any of the gas off the Gangsters. Like, why would you want to? It's going over so well. Al Sharpton's calling to congratulate him. I mean, shit, you're doing something right. But yeah, man, crazy to see Cactus Jack being brought in at such a lower step on the totem pole.
So we go to the 10/22/1994 from, again, Morgantown, North Carolina. 4 matches. Cactus Jack had his debut match at Smoky Mountain Wrestling, defeating Chad Austin. The TV championship on the line. Scott Sudd fought Sean Casey to a double disqualification. Lance Storm and Brian Lee defeated George South and Steve Skyfire. And the world title on the line, Dirty White Boy defeated Bruiser Bedlam to retain the title in a country whipping match. So after this match with Chad Austin, Cactus Jack's interviewed, and that's what Cactus is so good at too. That's a strength of his in the ring as well. He's interviewed following and talking about Boo Bradley. He says, I've been through everything, and when I looked at Bradley for the first time, he surprised me because I thought I was looking in a mirror. He said, I believe that he is my soulmate, and I think I found mine in Boo Bradley. Jack says, I know I can help him to find himself and find himself to be a stand-up man. Tammy comes over and interrupts him and says, Cactus, you have no right to be out here. You've cost me a lot of money, and you caused me a lot of grief. And Chris Candido can talk to Bradley, and Cactus offers a hug to Tammy, and she storms off. So we see that kind of comical side of Cactus that we eventually see. I mean, he becomes such, fast on his feet when it comes to comedic timing. But here it's that edgy Cactus Jack, especially the way he looks. He's so edgy, and he feels like larger than life for me seeing him here. Similar like how when we saw Macho here, but involving him in this undercard stuff, Cole, do you think there's more to what I was saying that you should have included him in this main event scene, or do you think it's okay to put him in this Boo Bradley thing to help get the Balls Mahoney character over?
I think that's exactly what they're doing. Because, I mean, yes, Cactus Jack would be fantastic in the main event scene. I mean, even if we did end up having a babyface versus babyface thing, between him and Dirty White Boy, it would have been cool. But I think they did. I think they wanted a little extra oomph to push Boo Bradley over. Because, I mean, like we said, the guy is making, top tier chicken salad out of this chicken shit they're giving him with this gimmick. But yeah, I think this comes in. This is a great layer, man. This is a layer I didn't know this storyline needed, and it does it also kind of pulls back the blinds a little bit and shows us. I mean, we'll get into it with the next episode a little bit, but it kind of shows some things that we hadn't necessarily seen yet between the way that Chris Candido and Tammy Fitch are treating him, and like the money that's involved with him being the TV champion and where that money's actually going and all that, it just kind of reveals that there's a lot more sinister stuff going on. There isn't just like this stupid dog gimmick. It's Chris Candido and Tammy Fitch are bad fucking people, and they're taking advantage of this dude who the announce team always likes to remind us they're not sure if he has enough brains to actually register pain. And it's, Cactus Jack really coming in as the moral hero here. I think is doing a lot to elevate Boo Bradley.
100%. We get more footage of the gangsters hanging out in the club, talking about Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and to their lawyer, Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson come up from behind the club, attack the gangsters with the trash can. They brawl in the club for a little while, and the Rock and Roll Express get the better of the exchange. And we get Rock and Roll are interviewed at the arena after, and they said, we don't regret attacking the gangsters because they deserve it. And they say they want a ghetto street fight with the gangsters to prove that New Jack and Mustafa are just chumps from Mississippi. Man, so strong words here. And again, rinse, repeat. This is sort of the carrying the show. I love this, and I love wrestling when it takes place out of the ring and creating a diverse environment where they're at the club, they're in the parking lot, one of my favorite segments in wrestling history is Booker T and Stone Cold in the grocery store.
Yes.
I love that stuff. And this was kind of akin to that.
I also love here, this is a very, something that happens in Smoky Mountain more than once, and I love it, is where a dig will be to say that your opponent is from somewhere they're not. Saying that these guys are chumps from Mississippi, when I think first episode we had Chris Candido telling everybody that Tracy Smothers was from fucking Pennsylvania. It's like just that regional pride just is it's incredible.
So we have that sit down, as I mentioned, confrontation with Jim Ross, with Tracy Smothers and Brian Anderson, who has his father Ole Anderson with him. Pretty much talking about Ole Anderson, saying that Smothers spreads nothing but lies, and Smothers went down to teach the wrestling coach, but didn't think it was a big deal. This is some sort of familiar issue that Jim Ross is trying to be the mediator between. And Tracy reminds Brian that anytime he wants him, they can make it happen. Jim Ross says that these two can meet in a no time limit match, which Brian is confident he can beat Smothers. Building up again, Brian Anderson, as we mentioned, his father, Ole Anderson, second generation stars are always in wrestling, going to carry a lot of weight. The name Ole Anderson goes a very long way, but I thought this was well done. Jim Ross sitting in the middle of them and making sure that he's holding court. There's something great about this, and even long, short, or whatever, even if you don't know the characters, there's something about Jim Ross kind of divvying out the questions, and people have enough respect not to attack each other with him there, and that speaks volumes about what they think about him as a broadcaster.
Yeah, I love those sit downs with Ross. So like the one with Austin and The Rock, where he's just like, come on, let
the Foley one is the best one, man. That's the Foley, the Foley one. That's the best one.
So damn right, man. But I mean, this is exactly how you utilize Jim Ross on TV outside of doing announcing. This is beautiful, man.
So we get prior to the main event, Ron Wright comes out to be in Dirty White Boy's corner. Jim Cornette's facial is so funny, man, because he's so surprised it happens. And, we get a whole bunch of stuff going on where eventually ends with Cornette whipping Wright with the belt. The Rock Room empties to make the save for White Boy and Wright. And we have a lot of stuff going on with Dirty White Boy. He did get the win, and he was able to retain his title, but kind of last laugh goes to Cornette and his crew, because you want to build the stories after. Dirty White Boy is livid with Jim Cornette doing it to Ron Wright, a man who's like his father, adds another layer to this feud. The only thing it's missing is anyone caring about it, right, Colton?
Yeah, man, 100%. I mean, this, at least the country whipping match, I feel like has given a little, at least we're giving it a stipulation to spice it up just a little bit.
Right.
But, it's just, I think, and like I said earlier, I don't want to talk any more shit on Bruiser Bedlam for fear of retaliation, but it's I think a lot of it, man, is just it's been played out. Like I said, I mean, they've been running this. I mean, we're coming up on almost 3-4 months of this being the title picture, man. I mean, even if you've got a real, even if you got a great program, you can only run that shit for so long.
Yeah.
The other thing we have to talk about here is Abdullah the Butcher being, we didn't mention that in the interview, but Abdullah the Butcher is going to be involved, that the mystery man involved is going to be Abdullah the Butcher at Thanksgiving Thunder. So we'll cover that next week, where he's going to be involved. And You know, if you're not familiar with Abdullah the Butcher, he's a legend. I mean, there's, you know, the famous pictures of him with the blood and like, you know, the landscape map that is his forehead and the fork, all the stuff that goes on with Abdullah the Butcher. So he is a big name here to show up, and just the latest example of them pulling out all the stops for these big shows and having him getting involved with this dirty white boy, Jim Cornette stuff. And they're trying at least to invigorate that storyline, but much to do about nothing. I mean, I feel like Bedlam and White Boy just needs to end. The issue needs to go away.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, another big get, you know, talk about talent sharing and seeing some big names in Smoky Mountain. Yeah, Abdullah the Butcher, an absolute legend, but kind of having his involvement, the better place to use him than right here, man. I mean, you know, maybe get Bedlam out of the picture. You want to bring Abdullah in to be the big heel for a few weeks. That sounds great, but him getting involved with this is just, it's just muddying an already muddy storyline for me.
Moving to our final Smoky Mountain Wrestling TV for October 10/29/94 from Morgantown, North Carolina. 3 matches here. Brian Anderson wins the TV championship from Scott Studd. Chad Austin defeated Bruiser Bedlam by DQ, and Ricky Morton fought Smoky Mountain Wrestling Tag Team Champion New Jack to a no contest. So we'll talk about that match and what made it a no contest. But we have Ron Wright saying he's come out of retirement to have a match with Jim Cornette. Nice. That opens the show. And then Dirty White Boy and Ron Wright are being interviewed regarding Bedlam and Cornette. White Boy says that I've talked to the board of directors. There will be a tag match where White Boy will team with Wright to battle Bruiser Bedlam and Jim Cornette. And White Boy promises the fans to take care of Bedlam so that Wright can get his hands on Cornette. And Ron Wright says, I'm going to destroy you, Jim Cornette, during the Thanksgiving Thunder week of shows. And he's going to make sure that Cornette gets loaded up in the ambulance and taken to the hospital. I think this would have a little bit more meaning if we knew about Ron Wright. You could tell the announcers like, oh my God, it's Ron Wright. And I'm just like, yeah. But wasn't he at Night of the
Legends? When Forbidden Doors coming around, like, who's Okada?
Enormous pop.
Yeah.
Oh man. No, I mean, I think for the locals, it means like, Ron Wright's been referenced, couple months back is, especially in these parts, having a lot of pull. Obviously he makes Tammy Fitch and them nervous, but yeah, I'm with you guys. I guess that is one of the things that we did not pick up in the DeLorean was the weight that Ron Wright's name carries as we're going back.
The other highlight of this show, we had the confrontation between Boo Bradley and Cactus Jack. Jack says that Bradley deserves better than Fitch and Candido. He says he would beat people up for Candido and get a sandwich. Bradley lives in a doghouse and has a hole which causes him to get wet when it rains. They continue. Boo gets $6 to buy shiny play toys. Bradley says Fitch holds his money for wrestling when he doesn't lose it. Cactus puts out his hand to show Bradley another way and wants Boo to shake his hand. Bradley says Candido is his friend, and if Jack is his friend, he can't be friends with Candido. Boo looks at him and says, they help me with my decisions because I don't have too many friends. Tammy comes back and says there wasn't any phone call. She whispers into Boo's ear, and Bradley proceeds to attack Cactus with the chair and chain and sends Jack into the concrete wall. And now we're going to get this feud between Boo, where could have went the other way. We thought we were going to have this faction between Boo Bradley and Cactus Jack, but close your eyes. It's Bowles Mahoney versus Mick Foley, bro. Here we go.
Yeah.
I feel like the sympathy coming from this storyline really plays into the Mankind character later on in the WWF years. I mean, this is Boo Bradley's Mankind, in a
lot of ways. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's Vince McMahon is Tammy and fucking Candido. It's so good, but it's brilliantly done. I love it. And I love that Boo Bradley is, getting his shit in it. This is a really compelling story. I dig it.
The Boo Bradley character, and I'm trying to think of the name. I just looked up the TV show from FX, Wilfred. That's what it reminds me of. He's just like the dog. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. It's actually someone's pet dog, but like he sees him as a human. So, and he's like, that's what the Boo Bradley character. And I guess if you look at it creatively, it's meta, and they're trying their best to create sympathy for him. And this would be something though that Jim Cornette rips apart. Say if AEW did something similar.
Oh yeah,
they would. Oh man, can you imagine what it would sound like? But I get where they're going with this because they were eliciting some emotion, and that's a big credit to Foley because you're watching this like he's putting his all into something that probably shouldn't have any sort of worth to it. But I'm kind of interested in it. I'll be honest with you. It had some weight to it watching Foley try to lure Boo out of this like the clutches of Fitch and Candido and. Watching him attack Cactus, I felt bad for Cactus too. And I'm like, am I feeling something for Boo Bradley right now? What is going on? He's making me feel something. And maybe all along the simple creative went a long way.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, hell, it's more. I'm more invested in this storyline than I am Bedlam versus Dirty
Oh,
White Boy.
100%.
1,000%.
So we talk about that main event here with Ricky Morton fighting New Jack to a no contest. The match kind of goes wild here, and Morton enters the ring immediately with a steel chair. He hits New Jack over the head, and Morton continues to nail Jack with the chair. Mustafa comes in. He attacks Morton from behind, and Robert Gibson enters the ring. All four men are brawling. There's chaos right now, and the fans are going wild. We got wrestlers from backstage attempt to get involved, but they're sent completely out of the ring. New Jack is absolutely gushing blood. And he brawls Morton on the floor, and nobody can get control of the situation as the show goes off the air. And really cool, because this is what we talk about. WCW, even AEW, WWF ending on a note of chaos, and going into Thanksgiving Thunder, we're like, I need to watch next week, because these guys, what happened after the cameras went off? What's going to happen when they're actually in a match together? And the Rock and Roll Express going down to the Gangsters level and using their strategies, attacking them from behind and having heel tendencies, brings another layer where, like, they're baby faces, but they're also playing by a different set of rules now.
Yeah, it just shows this is how fed up they are with the Gangsters at this point. Man, it's always this is not the first time we've seen Rock and Roll Express stoop to the tactics of their opponents, but it just means so much more in this storyline. It's so much better. It's just much more developed than their program with the Heavenly Bodies, in my opinion. And man, yeah, this was a killer ending to the last TV for October, man. And just like you said, absolute fucking chaos. And I was very impressed with this episode.
With that being said, let's get to our chaser and talk about what our favorite moment and matches were from both of these months in Smoky Mountain Wrestling 1994.
The Chaser.
All right, here we are with the Chaser. We're going to pick our favorite moments and matches from this part of Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Colton, let's start with you. Your favorite match or segment that you walked away being wowed by.
I mean, I know last week we talked, I said the Gangsters showing up and their development was my favorite. It's hard not to pick that again for these 2 months because they've been so good. But I will say I popped huge for Cactus Jack showing up. I love Cactus Jack, and great to see him here. But yeah, man, the Gangsters and Rock and Roll feud just keeps getting better.
Belcaster, what about you, my man?
I listen. I can't say anything opposite. The Gangsters thing is just riveting, on the tip of your seat program. But Cactus Jack being in there, the compelling side of bringing the sympathy to the character of Boo Bradley, making you really feel for him, making you, it's that classic Mankind story. And I really, really enjoy how this is going. I'm loving watching. I mean, Balls Mahoney was always one of my favorite guys in ECW. To see him kind of in his origins here in Smoky Mountain is great, but paired up with Cactus Jack, Mick Foley, he's my soulmate. It's one of those, like, you feel that shit, and I love it, man.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's hard not to pick Rock and Roll and the Gangsters. It's carried them for the last 2 months. And I think we're sitting here. It's a blessing to have this on here. Because can you imagine what it would look like if you didn't have this? And maybe 1994 is one of the reasons it's so heralded, is because of this type of storytelling that they're doing. And you can tell that there is a different mindset. They're being creative. And, as critical as we were as Boo Bradley when he first came in, watching it progress down the line and seeing Boo Bradley have this sort of edge to him, and it didn't go the way you thought it would, because it seemed obvious that he was going to wake up and see the light, like, oh, Candido and Fitch are taking advantage of me. It went the other way. He awoke in a monster, and like that is very similar to Mankind, as you mentioned. It was the birth of that, where Mankind was this monster, had this mean streak, but also had this cuddly teddy bear side. Sometimes a puppy dog, I guess you could make the argument. And it was, very awesome to see good storytelling. And the one thing I'll say is that if the world title picture could be shored up, this could be one of the all-time best years in all of pro wrestling. I think the shows are making up for that, but imagine what it would be like if you didn't have Dirty White Boy and Bruiser Bedlam putting on Snooze Fest in the, not even the semi-main event for the world title. And I want to get to the bottom of why ECW was like that too. In 95, we sat there and said, like, the world title really doesn't mean a lot. When Sandman was the champion and they're having these matches that really didn't hit in 95, boggles the mind. I wonder what that
Yeah.
what that is with the world title taking a backseat, because you would think it is like you book from there. Like, let's get the world title picture shirt up and figure everything else out. But feels like it's secondary, and you can make the argument again. Bad situation, Jake Roberts no show, but it was bad before that though. Like, let's be honest, it wasn't the storytelling with Brian Lee and Dirty White Boy was good initially, but they dragged that shit out exhaustingly to a point where it's like, all right, we get it. They don't like each other, and they're going to pass the title back and forth.
Yeah, I agree, man. And I think maybe it's just some of it is throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. They're trying out a lot of different stuff, and it just happened to the tag title picture happened to be the better storyline, so that's what you go with. I mean, I think a lot of it too is just we've had we talk about the talent sharing and we talk about the great names that we got to see in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, but like I said, a lot of it was there's still a lot of turnover too at the same time. So it's hard to book the top of the card when a lot of the biggest names you're seeing are, not here for more than, a month or so.
Very good point. And I guess, consistency and being there is the biggest attribute that a lot of these guys have. And who's there more than Bruiser Bedlam every single week? Him and Dirty White Boy are there ready with their gear on to do their program. And we saw with Jake Roberts, that wasn't guaranteed. But let's get into closing the tab. We're going to give our final wrap up. We'll get some shilling in. We'll preview next week, which, believe it or not, is the semi-finale of season 4 of Shot Nostalgia, believe it or not. But let's close the tab because the lights are coming on the bar, dude. You guys got to get out. You can't stay here all Friday night. Go somewhere else.
Closing the tab.
All right, as we close the tab, the bartender gave you, make sure you guys tip well, first of all, but we're going to preview next week, episode 6, season 4, going to be airing 8/11/2023, November of Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And from all accounts, November and December are not the most fruitful events. We'll be the judge of that as we watch them. But as we, get ready for the next week of the Tavern, we're sitting here August 4th. What a beautiful August it's been thus far. A lot of good stuff. August is going to be such a great month here at the Tavern, covering all things. We got All In on the horizon, All Out on the horizon. Belcast, let's start with you, man. So San Diego Comic-Con, you guys dropped a lot of stuff. Anything on Fig Night? Give all your stuff and preview it.
Oh my God, we've been just covering everything. Comic-Con was insane. It was so intense. There's so many reveals, so much shit going down. A lot of good content on that. And then on the thing, we have Alex West Kulex joining us, on this past week's episode. So make sure you guys go back and watch that. It was great. Starting to bring in the community a little bit more. We want to get the collectors involved with Fig Night, because where would we be without you guys? Where would you be without us? Right? We're all a goddamn team here. So we're sharing the love a little bit, having some fun with it. And yeah, man, we are really gun-ho on some AEW content right now. You got probably one of the biggest months of AEW's wrestling all year happening right now. We're going straight into All In. We had Punk teasing Wembley, so who knows what's going to happen, but we're going to be here covering it, and make sure you guys tune into the wrap up every Sunday night, man.
Yeah, we're on the eve of SummerSlam. SummerSlam's tomorrow night when you guys are watching this. Woo. And if you're listening to it this morning, hopefully you guys have a cup of coffee with the audio, getting ready for SummerSlam. Colton, preview your stuff, man. What's going on? I guess let people know about Brace for Impact and everything we got going on over there.
Yeah, man. Brace for Impact Thursdays at 10:10 on YouTube, and then audio drop on Apple and Spotify on Friday morning. We're having a ball covering Impact Wrestling, man, week to week. We are just knocking at the door of the Multiverse show with New Japan coming up August 20th. So, please stick with us. And yeah, man, we're having a ball going over that. I had the privilege a couple of weeks ago of being a guest on J-Bones Coming Down the Aisle. Always want to give love to the other Pod Foundation shows. So go check it out. It was a good time. We talked about a great ladder match, the Unification ladder match between Rob Van Dam and Jeff Hardy, Unification of the IC and the European titles. Quick ladder match, but a damn good one. And also the debate. I was talking to Chad, Tom, and Sneed the other day. Got some really exciting new guests coming up the next 4 or 5 weeks. So be sure to check out the debate show on Wednesdays.
Absolutely. And give you guys a little peek behind the curtain for season 5 of Shot Nostalgia. We're getting ready. Chad's getting the overlays ready. The intro looks amazing. We're covering Saturday night's main event. And I am the proud owner of these newsletters. I have them in tow. I paid for them. Thank you, Grant, from Canada. I think he lives on Hart Avenue, because that was the most appropriate thing ever. But I have all these newsletters, the ones that are not printed on. You can hear that right in the microphone. Look at that. It's like what is it called? ASMR right there. With the newsletters, that's the type of ASMR I like. The newsletters grinding against the microphone. But dude, the newsletters are fascinating and they are pivotal to what we do on Shot Nostalgia. So looking at the price points, the initial conversation, we're just off the heels of the first WrestleMania and talk about the influence and seeing how did Meltzer have an idea about how influential WrestleMania was and what it meant. And there was a section about AWA that I was initially reading. I think this was May of 1985, right off the heels of the first WrestleMania, and talking about how AWA was still kind of in control of like their talent and really popular. But I think one of the lines was that their big WrestleMania show put a big dent in what their future plans are. And I was like, that was just the most foretold thing of all time. And it's just great to read these things as historical documents, and they're not available, all of them. And hopefully one day they will be, if someone can be paid money to whatever, get them on a digital platform all the years, because there's ones from 1980, 82, 83. I have every single one from 85. Grant went through every single piece to find the relevant for Saturday night's main event for us. So I'm going to go through them, pour through the documents, make sure you guys have all the relevant information, and you're only going to get it here. You know, you could watch Saturday night's main event. People will tell you what color Macho Man's tights were and what they thought about the match. We're going to give you all the financial documents, how Saturday night's main event became a thing, NBC dipping their toe in pro wrestling. What else is better than that? And it's going to look amazing. Chad does such a good job with the graphics, and I'm looking forward to it. And I hope you guys are looking forward to it too. It's been a blast for all these seasons Shot Nostalgia. And this one has been probably the most fun. I'll be honest with you. I know we say that every season, but this has flown by. It does. There's not a level of this feeling like a chore at all. The research, the watching, the talking.
Yeah.
I thought this would have been harder to talk about, but in a lot of ways it's easier.
No, 100%. I mean, going back to ECW, I mean, a lot of it wasn't on the network. It was hard to, I mean, this is all on YouTube, readily available, thank God. But it's so cool to go through the history of it all. I mean, I would never known about the Cactus Jack Boo Bradley like thing going on right now unless we were doing this podcast. And it's just so awesome and so fulfilling, man. As a wrestling fan, I feel like not only deep diving into the history of it all, but finding like these characters before they turn into the Balls Mahoney's, before they turn into the Mankind's. You know, it's so important to get the vibe from that ride, and I love it, man. It couldn't be. I'm happy as a pig in shit right now. This is like my favorite day of the week, man.
So with that being said, before we get out of here, go to theturnbuckletavern.com, like and support everything we do. Go on Instagram. We're posting stuff every single day. Go on Spotify, leave a review, 5 stars on Apple, 5 stars on Spotify. If you do that, send me a screenshot of it. I'll send you some stickers. I got a lot of stickers. I got Shot Nostalgia stickers for every season. I got Tavern stickers. I got ACEFIELD Retro stickers. I will send them directly to your address, like the newsletter used to come right to your door. And get a shirt on Pro Wrestling Tees, guys. Support us. We're giving out lots of free content, and we're doing it for the love of pro wrestling. So if you like what we're doing, please show the love and support. And thank you guys for hanging out with us on a Friday. And Belcaster, lead us out. Do a little Jim Cornette. You know, I'm missing a little Jim Cornette, little Wendy's, whatever you want to do.
But before we get to that, who's Ron White? I've never heard of him before. But goddamn, fuck the dents in your car. I'm coming to your house, the baseball, smash your windows, get a felony, do all the good damn bullshit, and I'm going to enjoy a fucking cheeseburger after I do it. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for tuning in to the Shot of Nostalgia. We'll see